With the Ocarina of Time remake looming on the horizon, I thought this would be a good opportunity to update people on my thoughts on the 3D Zelda games as of around 3 years ago. This is a compilation of the videos I made back then, detailing some of my thoughts on how the 3D Zelda games have evolved and how my opinions of them have transformed over the years. If you're newer to the channel, or even if you've just seen these videos before, I think you'll get a kick out of sitting down for a couple hours and ruminating on the trajectory of the 3D Zelda games and where they might go in the future. What does it mean to grow? How much change is involved? Must you forsake your morals, your beliefs, your entire perspective in order to grow? Is it necessary to become a completely different person? Can you incrementally change, one step at a time, until you arrive at a place where you're happy? We all have our own relationship with growth. Some of us refuse to grow, content with who we are and what we've done. Some of us chase growth like a drug, constantly seeking out our perceived flaws in an effort to quash them. Many of us want to grow, but do we even know how? Why? If you ask me, growth is a natural process for which we have very little control. We are often at the mercy of what life decides to throw at us. We will grow older, we will discover what makes us mortal, and our only recourse is in how we choose to respond. As someone who yearns for growth to an almost unhealthy degree, my videos on the 3D Zelda games are hard to accept. I said and did things that I look back on with scorn, and I simply do not understand how anyone still stomachs anything I made back then. In 2017, I felt like I had something to prove. 2 years into YouTube, and there were convictions I held close to my heart. To be good at reviewing video games, it was necessary to steel my heart. If I didn't look at these games through an objective lens, nobody would take me seriously. Especially at that time, there was a push to look more critically at the media we consumed, to peer deep enough that their flaws would manifest. Through this, I adopted a rather strict approach to scriptwriting, in which no game could ever be a darling. Every game had dirty secrets, and it was my job to expose them. I am not proud of that. I was impatient, petty, and short-sighted. However, that is simply the nature of growth. To no one's surprise, I am not the same person I was 6 years ago. Just as I've already grown, there's a hunger within me for continued growth. I've spent every waking moment of my YouTube career trying to find that path, and I'll probably be on that journey for the rest of my working life. I never quite feel like I know what I'm doing or why anyone finds any value in what I say. Everyone starts somewhere. Everything starts somewhere. My channel didn't start with 3D Zelda, and I suppose Zelda itself didn't start with Ocarina of Time, but it built something, a foundation to work off of for nearly 2 decades. Some look at that foundation as old, tired. They see the new foundation set by Breath of the Wild and wonder how we ever stomached the days of linear progression and companions. I do not. What Ocarina established is, frankly, legendary. So legendary that there's an equivalent group of people who are frustrated that Zelda left these games behind. Was that the right move? What was it we had here? What did Ocarina of Time build? Ocarina of Time was once seen as the apex of gaming. And hey, I'm sure someone out there still believes that. Good on ya. You're valid. All I mean to say is that the passage of time changes all things. Like it or not, we can't travel back to the time where this was the hottest shit on the market. We simply cannot eliminate 25 years of hindsight. It will be there, breathing down our necks. Ocarina seems strangely unconcerned with those consequences. Probably because it's a game about the passage of time, what it does to the world, how people react to it, and how we're meant to find the strength to brave that future. Despite it being nearly 25 years old, it is still ironically the strongest coming-of-age video game that has ever existed. One you can relate to at any age that shifts with you. All it had to do was take the structure of A Link to the Past and transform it into something wholly unique. That game made you feel powerless at the beginning, so that your growth throughout the adventure would be even more pronounced. By the time you save Zelda and exit the castle, you already feel like you've proven yourself, yet its structure somewhat arbitrarily dictates that you're still in the tutorial phase. I won't deny that defeating Aghanim and being sent to the Dark World is a cool moment, one that will always stick with me. But what impressed me more was how natural Ocarina made it feel. All it took was a simple change. You start your adventure as a child. You take on smaller challenges. Your view of the world is more juvenile. You fight bats, spiders, and jellyfish. There's definitely still a level of danger involved, but it's limited to giant lizards and overgrown tentacle parasites. It's nothing you can't handle, and along the way, you meet a lot of colorful characters. Talon, the clumsy ranch owner, his cute daughter Malin, the guard who wants a Keaton mask for his son. You get to play shooting gallery games in the castle town. Citizens are dancing in the streets, enjoying the present moment. There's a feeling of safety in this initial phase. The training wheels are still on, as you come to grips with how to use your sword, bombs, and boomerang. You have fairly ordinary tasks. Cleansing the evil from within the Great Deku Tree, Dodongo's Cavern, and Jabu Jabu's belly. Which isn't to say there's no danger. Queen Goma, King Dodongo, and Baronade all pose a significant threat to a child. It's simply that they're all child's play, next to Ganondorf. After all you've accomplished, he swats you away like a gnat. He commands a powerful presence, but not without a cunning mind, tricking Link into opening the doorway to the Sacred Realm. Much like the transition from childhood to adulthood, Link quite suddenly finds himself in a broken world. The future version of Hyrule is a shadow of its former self. The castle has been demolished. Castle Town is overrun by reanimated corpses. The Gorons are trapped inside the Fire Temple. Zora's domain has been completely frozen over. Ganondorf won, and the mountain you have to climb to defeat him is much, much larger than it was as a kid. In this moment, whether you're ready or not, you're thrown into the fire and forced to grow up. You are allowed to travel back whenever you want. If this new world is too terrifying, too overwhelming, you can return to those halcyon days where the skies were bright and the people were nice. It's just that you can't give up your knowledge of what is to come. Your current form is powerless to stop Ganondorf, and a bleak future is on its way. You realize that there's always been a dark side to Hyrule when you travel to the bottom of the well, filled with unholy abominations. That evil had always been there, right under your nose. That childhood innocence you enjoyed was robbed from you by Ganondorf, and you will never get it back. So, forward unto the great unknown it is then. This future doesn't just look harsh. Now you're fighting off fire-breathing dragons, evil specters, giant floating skulls, and armored knights. The medallions you seek are locked away in nearly impenetrable fortresses, cloaked in unspeakable evil. The stakes have risen, and you're up against far more than you were before. Yet you are more capable. You wield the Blade of Evil's Bane, a sword with more reach and power than your dagger. Your pesky slingshot is upgraded into an accurate bow. Your slow and cumbersome boomerang is upgraded into the efficient and precise hookshot. Slowly but surely, you build an arsenal of magical artifacts and tools. A tunic resistant to the heat, and one which lets you breathe underwater. Boots which let you sink below water, or hover over gaping chasms. With each dungeon you complete using these tools, you'll gain access to new dungeons, all the while raising your vitality, and perhaps even your courage. Growing up, losing innocence, all of it is expected. It is something we all must experience at one point or another. As we age, things become more clear. We gain a better grasp on life and its inner workings. But with that power comes an even greater challenge. No longer are you led by the hand. Your life becomes your own, at a pace no one can ever prepare you for. And that can be quite exhausting, terrifying even. Where does one begin? What are we meant to do? An impossibly tall mountain stands before us, and life asks us to climb. We all have to find the strength within ourselves to reach that peak, lest we're swallowed by the abyss of reminiscence. Yet, even with strength, the footholds don't magically appear. Often you have to go out of your way to find them. I used to be pretty impatient. Some would argue I still am, but I like to think I've mellowed out over the years. I think, as I've gotten older, played more and more games, I've come to realize that I don't particularly like having things handed to me. I'm at a point now where tasks that force me to rack my brain to figure out the answer are a lot more compelling than following a waypoint. If it means I have to sit there for a while and think, at a loss as to what comes next, I welcome it. After all, with Zelda, the journey is far more important than the destination. Ocarina revels in the journey. You don't know where all of the dungeons are until you either ask someone or stumble upon one. Much of the time, progression is about unlocking an item, then figuring out how you can use it. To unlock the way to Dodongo's cavern, there are several roadblocks to clear first. Darunia seems to be in a bad mood and wants a catchy song to cut loose. Nearby, there's a tunnel with rocks where a Goron comments that they can hear something through it. The Great Deku Tree taught you the various ways you can use fire to solve puzzles. You can light torches and burn spiderwebs, so who says you can't also light bombs conveniently placed on the walls? This aha moment will further train your mind to look for interactions like this. You've been thinking outside the box since the first dungeon, and now it's paying off by unlocking a shortcut from Death Mountain to the Lost Woods. You learn Saria's song here, which you can play for Darunia, who will reward you with the Goron bracelet. Link can then pick up bomb flowers, which can be used to open the way to Dodongo's cavern. You could argue that this is a needlessly convoluted progression. What if the player doesn't connect the dots, lighting the bombs with a lit Deku stick? I suppose in the age of the internet, it's not really a huge deal. They'll just look it up and get slightly pissed off, as I once did many years ago. But I think it's worth letting that frustration be a possibility if the trade-off is the potential for a cool revelation. If you talk to the Goron outside Darunia's room, he'll give you the answer. The Song of the Forest will calm Darunia down. At that point, if you hadn't been clued in already, you might figure out that talking to people, investigating objects, that stuff is pretty helpful. You can use that knowledge to, say, learn that Jabu Jabu likes fish. It makes sense that Link isn't going to know what to do without talking to someone. Navi is there for guidance, but she won't tell you everything, and she only pops up every once in a while for a hint. Ultimately, isn't it more fun to soak everything in, take it all one step at a time, learn more about the world you're exploring? You'd think so, but I didn't always agree. Although it is easy to say this in retrospect, now that I know all of the answers. It's impossible to know whether or not I'd greet these same challenges with a determined mind these days. I'm inclined to believe I would, but it's not a question that can ever truly be answered. What I can say is that I've become increasingly annoyed with games making their next step forward too obvious. I personally found Metroid Dread way too easy to figure out, since at almost every point, you're given a teleporter which spits you out exactly where you need it to be. It sort of bummed me out. I was looking forward to exploring every inch of the map and getting a little bit lost. What better satisfaction is there than finally discovering a new area when you've been scouring the world for an hour? Having a progression like this usually means that your adventure feels less suffocating. Since the onus is on the player to figure out where to go, it means that there's a little more freedom when exploring as an adult. You might not even catch this on a first playthrough, but there's nothing stopping you from going straight to the Fire Temple and completing it before the Forest Temple. The bow is only required to unlock the dungeon map, which isn't necessary for completion. Though you could also do the Fire Temple near the end, since the Megaton Hammer isn't required to complete any other dungeon. It's hard to say if any of this was even intentional. There even being an eye switch in the Fire Temple implies the developers wanted you to have the bow before you went there. There are also actual impossibilities, like the Shadow Temple being locked behind the acquisition of the Forest, Fire, and Water medallions. But then, does it even actually matter if this stuff was intentional or not? I think in discussions of game design, or really any work of art, we place a great emphasis on what the developers wanted to do, which is fine, I do it all the time. The directive of the creators is important to consider. However, I don't think it should be the end-all be-all. Consider this: you can complete the water temple first without entering any of the other dungeons by warping out while the water is on the second level and hookshotting at a precise angle. From there, you perform a relatively simple jump to the level 3 water panel, and you're able to skip using a small key. Now, I'm fully aware that all your bullshit alerts went off just now. That's a glitch, right? You weren't meant to do that. Yeah, probably not. Does that mean we can't, say, enjoy those glitches on the same level as intended mechanics because they weren't meant to be there? It's funny, when there are game-breaking glitches, bugs which get in the way of progression, we're quick to label a game bad due to their existence. Yet when the tables are flipped, when speedrunners discover tricks or glitches which open games up and make them more fun to play, suddenly we aren't allowed to reference them when we talk about how much we like them. It's a conflict I face all too often writing about the games I like. I feel this pressure to discount glitches and tricks that are genuinely cool. Those days are behind me. I don't care anymore. Ocarina of Time is one of the most fun Zelda games to replay because of how broken it is. Did you know you can complete the Spirit Temple before any other dungeon? Normally, you'd need the Long Shot, Lens of Truth, and Prelude of Light. You'd probably then think, okay, so you have to do the Forest Temple, Water Temple, and the Bottom of the Well before the Spirit Temple. Well, you don't actually need any of those things. The Prelude of Light isn't necessary for anything, since a simple save and reset will place Link at the Temple of Time as an adult and Kokiri Forest as a kid. That means you won't need to finish the Forest Temple. Either the Long Shot or Hover Boots are required to cross the quicksand gap in the wasteland, but neither of them are required if you simply backwalk over it, which takes the Water Temple out. That means you only need the lens from the bottom of the well, though you actually don't if you memorize the path through the wasteland, which is entirely possible. There's nothing stopping the player from memorizing the path the ghost takes through repeated playthroughs and mimicking it. Eventually, you'll learn where the triggers are and how to avoid them, which means it is possible to do the Spirit Temple before any other adult dungeon. The only thing separating the progression tricks in Ocarina of Time from the ones in Breath of the Wild is, quite literally, developer intent. The reality is that both games allow for a fairly open progression that make them both fun to replay, intentional or otherwise. Playing it so much has actually made me discover a part of myself who maybe enjoys the days where games were a little less polished to a mere sheen. Don't take that the wrong way. There are obviously benefits to modern gaming. Games are much more consistently able to execute on their full visions, unencumbered by underpowered technology. I won't deny the beauty of that, but I also can't bring myself to think any less of Ocarina for being as broken as it is. I suppose I find it kind of charming, a mark of the era, if you will. Now, brace yourselves. I'm about to take this line of reasoning to its logical next step. I've argued in the past that fan work is the future of a vibrant games industry. Be that independent developers, ROM hackers, modders, anyone who fits that description. It's why we'll always consider AM2R a Metroid game, no matter how many people it upsets. Lately, I've been thinking, where does that leave mods, hacks, or fan-created ports? Where do we include something like Ship of Harkinian in this discussion, a fan-made PC port with reverse-engineered code? It supports widescreen, an uncapped frame rate, gyro aiming, debug tools. It even has a built-in randomizer. And all you need is your own copy of the game. Is Ship of Harkinian a valid base with which to discuss Ocarina of Time in a modern context, or are we only allowed to consider the original 1.0 release? In regards to its place in history and its influence, it wouldn't make much sense. But for contemporary discussion, the here and now, its enduring legacy, well, like it or not, what Ocarina of Time even is has evolved. I played the 3DS remake before I played the N64 version, and I'm sure that's the case for many others as well. We've reached a point now where there are likely people playing Ship of Harkinian who have never even touched Ocarina of Time, or people who have watched someone else stream it on Twitch and experienced it that way. Should Master Quest be included in the discussion, as it was only introduced in the GameCube re-release? If we're willing to consider the PC port as a valid release, Perhaps the randomizer feature is something we can consider a mirror mode, hero mode, or Master Quest equivalent. After all, if Ship of Arcanion was on the Nintendo Switch, everyone would be fine to consider the randomizer as such. I bring this up because Ocarina's randomizer is very important to me, and it's one of the reasons I've been able to appreciate the base game so much more. See, most Zelda games are fun, but they're usually the most fun on your first playthrough. That's when you don't really know anything, so every move you make is a discovery of some kind. Some Zelda games are fun to replay, but you're never going to get that first-time experience back. It's one of the weaknesses of how early 3D Zelda was envisioned. I think the water temple is expertly designed. It forces you to think about its layout, how the water levels open and close pathways, and it's very easy to get lost. However, after you've solved it once, you're likely not going to struggle when you play it again. This is what makes the randomizer so revolutionary. It breathes life back into the ordinary. You have the ability to shuffle the locations of every item. Suddenly, all of the keys in the water temple might be switched, meaning you'll need to solve it in an entirely different way. Except the long shot isn't guaranteed to appear in the water temple, so before you can finish it, you'll need to find the long shot, which can be anywhere. What you've done is turn the whole game into a dungeon, one with a different solution every time. Suddenly, the suspense from opening a chest is back. The wonder and intrigue upon entering a dungeon is back. Hence why I've played Ocarina so many damn times. There are an endless amount of settings to tweak the experience. Randomize dungeon entrances, turn off dungeon keys, shuffle the grotto entrances, let items appear in the shops. You can also give Link any number of items at the start if you don't want to, say, go looking for the Ocarina or the Prelude of Light. Tweaking these settings every once in a while can have a drastic impact on your overall experience, and ensures you'll almost never get bored of doing them. Running one of these every once in a while with some friends has also encouraged me to learn so many tricks I would otherwise have had no reason to learn casually. The only reason I can cross the wasteland without any of the required items so efficiently these days is because it would have given me the edge in a randomizer. It has a similar appeal to a roguelike, where you get different items in different orders each time. It will also teach you things you've probably never known about. Did you know you can use the hover boots in the Forest Temple to access secret areas without backtracking? Did you know that Bongo Bongo could be defeated with only a hook shot? These are situations you might find yourself in during a randomizer, forcing you to really think outside the box and consider all of your available options to progress forward. It also gives every single item check an increased level of importance. What before might have just been some rupees, a piece of heart, bomb refills, etc., can now be absolutely anything. It's fairly easy even on casual playthroughs to skip over heart pieces out of laziness because it simply isn't a hard enough journey to warrant having so many hearts in the first place. With a randomizer, every secret is precious, and you might even discover some that you've never known about. Did you know there was a Skulltula in Zora's Fountain hidden under a silver gauntlet rock? Your only reward for collecting all the Skulltula is a refillable 200 rupees, hardly worth going for considering how little money actually matters, especially that late in the game. However, if every Skulltula could have an important item, you'll learn all their locations pretty quickly. And if you put items in the shops with random prices, suddenly there's a value to money that was never quite there before. Almost every problem Ocarina suffers from is remedied by playing the randomizer, and whether or not we include this in discussions of the game, there is no doubt in my mind that playing the randomizer has ultimately improved my appreciation for the vanilla game. It's probably done so for a lot of people. Much like Link awakening to a ruined future, there's no going back and flipping that switch. I like the game a hell of a lot more than I did before the existence of the randomizer. That shouldn't even be a surprise. After all, growth is simply natural. Ocarina of Time has most certainly grown. In the late 90s, the game must have felt like magic. Your starting area, Kokiri Forest, has an almost dreamlike quality to it, filled with children who never age, consigned to a forest hidden away from the rest of the world, who all have magical fairy companions protected by a giant talking tree. No area feels one and done. Everywhere you end up is somewhere memorable and rich with stuff to learn. Kakariko Village initially seems like a quaint little town. You help the Cucco lady gather her lost Cuccos, piss off the windmill guy, maybe go on Dompe's grave-digging tour. It's all fun and games until you travel underground, where Hyrule's secrets are laid to bare. All manner of evil creatures live in the well. Skulltula, Gibdos, Lakes, Dead Hands. It is an extremely unpleasant place, as are all the graves behind the town. But none are as disturbing as the Shadow Temple. Here is gathered Hyrule's bloody history of greed and hatred. Guillotines, redeads, Gibdos, dead hands, spike traps, death pits. You can intuit a lot about this place by putting the pieces together. At one point, Hyrule had a civil war in which one kingdom won out and unified. The Sheikah tribe were responsible for building this torture chamber. For what means? One can only guess. If you don't look too far past the surface level, all you see here is a spooky temple. It's why you need the Mask of Truth to see the whole picture. If you're not looking at everything for what it truly is, you may as well be blind. It's said that the temples are all connected to the sacred realm, and that Ganondorf used it to pollute each one with evil. He sends Phantom Ganon to the Forest Temple. He resurrects Volvagia to trap the Gorons. He sends Morpha to drain the water in Lake Hylia and freeze Zora's domain. His influence is felt everywhere, but the Shadow Temple? He didn't need to do anything, because the Kingdom of Hyrule had done enough. Bongo Bongo was sealed in the bottom of the well by Impa, and it hides away in the Shadow Temple when it escapes. I don't think it's even a question that Ganondorf is evil, but I do often wonder, where did that hatred come from? And when you look at places like the Shadow Temple, or how the Gerudo are closed off from the rest of the kingdom, it paints a less than pleasant picture of the current royalty. Ganondorf was not necessarily right to take over the kingdom and ruin it, but I think it builds an understandable motivation for him to be angry at the world and soak in its evils. I think this is part of why Ocarina sticks in our minds. So much of it is still a mystery. Most of what we know about the Shadow Temple is hidden in context clues and little snippets from the Hyrule Historia. We don't quite know the origins of the Poe sisters, or what most of the temples were built for. The Zora claim the Water Temple was built to worship the water spirits, but is the presence of Dark Link a result of them, or a result of Ganondorf? In a way, I think it's sort of beautiful that we might never know the full answers to these questions. We can still speculate about them to this day, giving it a life far beyond itself. And it makes exploring these temples feel even more foreboding. What do you think about wandering the hallways of the Forest Temple, listening to that haunting track? The mystery, the spooky music, the low-poly, dark look of the N64, it all swirls together to craft something truly unforgettable, an adventure that builds out the world and the threat of Ganondorf. At the same time, in the current year, that magic has waned considerably. We know how to manipulate the game's code to give us any item we want, or teleport us wherever we want. We all know exactly where to go and when, how to bypass item requirements where every event is triggered. We have an understanding of Ocarina of Time now that is better than the people who gave it to us. Yet, is it not the mark of a truly fascinating piece that it elicits such curiosity in all of us? That so many different people cared enough to figure all of this out? That so many people still consider it one of the best video games ever made? Ocarina's legacy is defined by so much more than mere nostalgia. It is a story of growth so staggering that it transcends the boundaries of time itself. Time will continue to move, and Ocarina will move with it. As I grow older, I'm beginning to realize that many of my favorite video games probably had a nightmarish development cycle. To give us legendary video games, the people who made them had to suffer. Not only that, but without their suffering, the games we got may not have been so bold. Is that to be celebrated or lambasted? It's a question I struggle with in an age where working conditions are horrible and developers speak out about crunch culture. One could argue that it all feels like ancient history, and maybe it is. Nevertheless, the circumstances of Majora's Mask's development are almost unable to be divorced from the final product. Link has grown, Navi has left him, and he's completely alone in an unfamiliar new world. He may have confronted and defeated the evils plaguing him, but where does that leave him? What does it truly mean to grow up? What's left for us at the end of it all? A lot of heroes' journeys leave us with a warm, bubbly feeling inside. We've conquered evil, gotten past our insecurities, and it's happily ever after. That's certainly the feeling you get with everyone dancing at Lon Lon Ranch, rejoicing at the demise of Ganondorf. Very few stories have the courage to ask, what happens next? Where does it all end? What are we supposed to do in the meantime? In the face of our inevitable demise, is there any meaning in what we choose to make of ourselves? Aonuma attributed the name Termina to a place where people come and go, like a terminal. It's a place where ideas are exchanged and energies mix, though I can't help but fixate on the other meaning of the word terminal, situated at the end of something. In this colorful land of festivals and minigames, darkness looms. It isn't hidden like you'd expect. It hangs over everyone, plain as the night sky. All you have to do is look up. The moon is terrifying. It's not a symbol you can attribute malice to. It simply is. It will crash into Termina and kill everyone. There's no escaping it. Whether you're smack dab in the middle of Clocktown or far off in the depths of the Great Bay Temple, the end is coming for everyone. Some of us run from it. Some of us embrace it. Some of us don't even notice. Nevertheless, it is indifferent to how we feel about it. The end is nigh, and each of Termina's residents are faced with the question of, what do we do? Some of us devote ourselves to our work, finding value in what we bring to this world. Some of us put on a brave and powerful front, telling everyone we don't care, while we cower in fear when no one's looking. Some of us bicker over the smallest of things, arguing away the little time we have left. Some of us are too wrapped up in the embrace of another to pay the end any mind. There is no right or wrong answer. What's the point, then? Why do anything at all if it's fated to be erased? Fittingly, this is a question Majora asks the player directly by giving them the ability to turn back time. From a certain point of view, everything you do here is meaningless. No matter who you help, that progress is fated to be undone. It is impossible to help everyone in a single loop. So why bother? This is the reasoning that a lot of people use to dismiss it outright. For many people, that loop is extremely frustrating. It's hard to blame them. Like the moon, Majora's Mask is completely unconcerned with player happiness. You're going to have to learn each character's schedule and follow the beat of their drum. If you don't make it to Icona Canyon to meet Kafei, all of the work you put into that side quest ends then and there. You have to start again from the top. If you're stuck in the Stone Tower Temple, desperately searching for that last stray fairy, the moon isn't going to stop to let you finish. You might not even be able to see it, but you can feel it. The earth vibrates around you, the clock keeps ticking, and the music beckons to it. There's a unique despair to Majora's Mask's time travel. Time traveling for the first time was a bit intimidating in Ocarina, but it came with a more physically capable body and a wider range of tools. The world may have gotten scarier, but you are better equipped to deal with that harsher future. Majora gives you a lot of tools. You can skip forward several hours into the future, slow the flow of time down to a crawl, or reset back to the first day. But this control you have over time only allows you to manage its flow. That control only extends so far. If you're late to meet a character or fail to finish something, you aren't allowed to rewind a few hours back. You can only ever start back at the beginning. On my recent playthrough, I failed the Romani Ranch invasion several times, which is a side quest that involves several days of buildup. Each time I failed, I felt this anger welling up inside me that I hadn't felt playing a game in quite a while. All that preparation down the drain, forced right back to the starting line. Majora lets you wallow in that negativity for a while. You'll feel despair, frustration, sorrow. At times, you might even question why you're doing any of this at all. This isn't fun, it isn't productive, and it's causing me pain. Why am I doing this. It took 4 years to develop Ocarina of Time, and it was clear Nintendo wanted to get a little more mileage out of what they had created. Led by Eiji Aonuma, Shigeru Miyamoto, and Yoshiaki Koizumi, Majora's Mask would be made in about a year. Ocarina sold 7 million units, which was a colossal success, and the team expressed confusion as to how they wanted to move forward with a sequel to such a smash hit. Not only was this team under pressure, they were under a massive time crunch. The moon was inspired by a North Korean missile, which sailed past the country and almost made impact while the members of the team attended a wedding. It's almost impossible to separate Majora from the atmosphere it was made under. It's, at least in part, a product of the stress and anguish of those who made it. In other words, we enjoy Majora's Mask at the expense of those who gave it to us. In our current landscape, crunch is looked down upon more than ever. It's a massive problem in the games industry that's probably always been around, but never widely discussed. And so it feels a little weird to look back at Majora's Mask and applaud Nintendo for churning this out in a year. I watch characters like the postman freaking out about the end of the world, or the townspeople arguing about whether they're going to stay and continue the festival, or flee and be with their loved ones, and I can't help but think to myself, was this what the devs were thinking? Some of the Carpenter dialogue was actually meant to reflect what they were thinking, whether they'd be up all night working, or wondering if it'll be ready in time. Even the game's most iconic line, "You've met with a terrible fate," was meant to reflect how much pressure the devs felt to deliver a functional final product by this seemingly impossible deadline. They used their co-worker's wedding to come up with the story for Anju and Cafe. Even off the clock, their minds needed to be at work, or they wouldn't finish in time. Despite there not really being anyone above me setting deadlines, I often find myself in a similar headspace. It's not uncommon for me to work on a script all day and all night, forgetting to eat or sleep. When I get on a roll editing, I find it hard to stop. There are times where my body will be at a family gathering, and my mind will be somewhere else entirely, trying to think up ideas for the next video, or desperately trying to figure out how I want to say something. Especially when I find myself backed into a corner, there's a real pressure for me to break through the brick wall and get something down on the page. Writing is my passion, but it's also my job, and that cross-contamination can be poisonous for even the best of us. As someone who has recently found themselves in a bit of a slump, with my mind constantly racing about things outside of my control that terrify me to no end, I have to admit, reading the dialogue from the townsfolk was extremely painful. Trying to solve their problems felt like trying to solve my own, and I had to stop myself from looking up at the sky or just staring at that clock, watching the numbers tick down. The majority of my play sessions were, quite frankly, miserable. In general, Majora's Mask is the 3D Zelda I'm the least familiar with. There were so many things I'd forgotten about character schedules, heart piece locations, and dungeon layouts. Coming right off my Ocarina 100% playthrough, which I was able to finish in a swift 10 hours, I felt like a lost puppy in Termina. I had to retry Anju and Cafe several times. I kept missing important events, being forced to look up a bunch of stuff online. Usually, I hate looking stuff up, but I also didn't want to take too long making this video. I already had to basically rewrite massive chunks of it after feeling unsatisfied with what I had already spent months working on. The less I upload, the less people care about me. The less the algorithm cares about me. The less I'm able to grow, the less secure I'm going to feel about the channel's future, and thus, my own. I can't waste time. I need to move. It doesn't matter if I have no idea what videos I'm going to make next. I'll just have to make something, which is actually how my Donkey Kong Country 2 video turned out. I needed a video, that one seemed like a good idea, and I wrote it in an extremely short time frame. Looking at it next to my DKC1 video, which took me months to write, I really do regret putting out that video on the sequel when it felt like I had much less to even say about it. But I can't dwell on stuff like that for very long, can I? It can't matter that I have no idea how to structure this next video. It won't matter that I've been staring at a blank page for hours. If I don't distract myself, my mind is going to wander again. I can't think about the fact that one of the world's nuclear powers is threatening to blow everyone up. I can't think about the fact that the global water level is rising past the point of no return, and nobody on planet Earth seems to be fucking concerned about it. I can't think about the fact that at any moment a planet-killer meteor could crash into the Earth and eradicate us in an instant. I can't think about the fact that absolutely anything could go wrong in my body and end my life without me even knowing. If I let my mind wander for even a moment, I'll be dragged right back down into the pits of despair. I have to keep playing. I have to keep writing. I have to keep going. After all, if they could make Majora's Mask in a year, why can't I write a single fucking video? You'd be mistaken for thinking Majora's Mask is about despair. That's what you're presented with for the majority of your time here. A couple kept separated by the strands of fate. A poisonous swamp sucking the life out of the earth. A young guitarist's life snuffed out forever. It's easy to lose sight of yourself when your victories are so fleeting. It's always on to the next task, with very little time to appreciate what you've given to this world. But it's those small, brief victories that keep us going. Letting the postman carry out his final delivery. Giving Lulu her voice back, saving Romani Ranch, reuniting Anju and Cafe. Those moments stick with you, a constant reminder of why you have to keep going. While it's true that success is fleeting, so too is failure. Tomorrow is always a new day. Yeah, there were times where I wanted to bang my head against the wall, but then there were times I couldn't stop playing. There might only be 4 of them, but the dungeons are all excellent. Each of them use your mask transformations to their fullest, and have central mechanics that require you to consider the layout of the whole dungeon. Snowhead Temple has the central pillars, Great Bay Temple has the colored water pipes, and Stone Tower Temple has the gravity manipulation. Not only was the way forward never obvious, the stray fairies were devilishly hidden to give each room an added observational challenge. The transformation masks carry with them so much more than a normal item. You get to literally become the Goron hero or the Zora guitarist. Their lives may have been cut short, but you were able to heal them and ease their pain. They were able to pass on without regrets, knowing that someone would be there to carry on their will and finish what they couldn't. You have the powerful strength of Darmani behind you, able to roll across terrain faster than Epona and travel through lava with ease. That strength allows you to push down switches and move large objects. The Zora mask lets you swim through the water effortlessly, as well as walk along the seafloor. There are even boomerangs built in for good measure. In one respect, it might be kind of boring that each dungeon item revolves around the bow, but the transformation masks make up for that by being several items in one. By combining them like this, it's rare for the transformations to feel useless. The Great Bay Temple is as much about the Zora mask as it is about the ice arrows. That's part of why the dungeons feel so memorable too. They each reflect a region of Termina, which each have their own struggles. Defeating the boss also heals the area you're in, opening up new possibilities. Defeating Odalwa removes the toxins from the swamp, and you're able to save the monkey from being roasted alive. Defeating Gyorg clears up the murky waters of the Great Bay, and also gives Lulu her voice back. Majora's Mask runs the full gamut. It can be annoying, frustrating even, but it's also got some of the most fun challenges in a Zelda game. Where its dungeon count might be low, there are loads of mini-dungeons dotted across the land. Icona Castle, the Pirate's Fortress, the Deku Palace, all of them are fun to complete and make each of the 4 major areas even more distinct. Its side content, while occasionally confusing and strict, has some of the most fulfilling stories in any Zelda game. No matter how arduous it is to reunite Anju and Cafe, I do it every single time I play Majora's Mask, because seeing them together at the end of it all, happy to simply be wed before they're wiped off the face of the earth, it fills me with strength no matter how many times I see it. Really, that's why Majora works so well. Instead of the adventure being about despair, it's about the hope you feel when you're at your lowest point. We've all been there, at our wits' end, swamped with God knows how many worries, stressors, seemingly insurmountable obstacles. It's easy to give in, but Majora's Mask reminds us that hope burns ever brighter the taller the darkness looms. The ending is ultimately a happy one. There were so many horrors along the way in this twisted kingdom, so many people unhappy, so many stories left unresolved. But what matters is that in the end, you never gave in. To some, it may seem naive to hope. In fact, I think it's naive to hope. There's a part of me that doesn't want to hang on, knows that it's no different from gambling. Hope doesn't mean jack shit, but when the sky is falling, when we have to face our own powerlessness, stare into its welcoming embrace, like it or not, hope is all we truly have. It's what keeps us sane. It's probably what kept the devs sane through the sleepless nights at their computers, toiling away on a game they had no time to reconsider. I'm sure they gave in to despair plenty of times, but they also had the strength to see it through to the end. Not only that, what they created in such a short time is one of the most incredible experiences I will ever have with this medium. A shining example of what games are capable of, one that will stick in our hearts and minds forever. Yeah, it's not great that their health suffered. I don't think they should have been made to lose so much of their lives to this. Nevertheless, the past is the past, and this is what we're left with. All we can do is encourage safer working conditions for the future and continue to appreciate the work that they left us with. A painful piece, one that looks death straight in the face and dares to smile. When is it we can say we've matured? It's easy to place ourselves on a scale and say that we are more mature than we once were, but when does that process conclude? Does it conclude? I wonder if some of you are thinking that I've matured, that I'm about to reveal to you that I was wrong to be so harsh on The Wind Waker, and that I've secretly come around on it. I feel as though some people get the impression that I hate The Wind Waker. It is indeed one of my least favorite Zelda games. I think it tried to bite off way more than it could chew, and left us with a bit of a middling half-step towards something that would be achieved with much more gusto in the far, far future. To say I hate it, though, would be treating this like a zero-sum game. After all, some of them are going to sit at the bottom. A few of them have to. That's how relativity works. I have a lot of appreciation for The Wind Waker and acknowledge many of its unique strengths. One of the reasons I love Zelda so much is that almost all of them appeal to me and my interests on a basic level. The Wind Waker might not be my favorite, but it's easy for me to see why it might be someone else's. We might not always make the half-court shot, but we sort of have to admire the balls to shoot that far to begin with. There's a boundless ocean here. Get in your boat and sail the high seas. Where you end up is for you to decide. There are 49 quadrants, each with an island and various other secrets to discover. It's able to sell this fantasy primarily in its aesthetic elements. I'd argue it still has the strongest artistic cohesion of any Zelda. It's safe to say that what was initially one of its greatest weaknesses has slowly morphed into one of its greatest strengths. Returning to the GameCube version, I'm astonished by how gorgeous it still is. The cell shading gives everything a vibrant, bouncy feel. We've gone from one of the most unsettling Zeldas to one of the most welcoming. Traditionally scary enemies like Redeads have been given a more cartoony appearance. The music is more upbeat and cheerful, and there are tons of genuinely funny moments to reset the tone of the story. Hints of a darker tone remain, embodied by characters like Ganondorf and the King of Red Lions, but above the water, it's a simpler tale of a young boy searching for his lost sister. We see the adventure through those innocent eyes. No time travel forcing us to grow up, nor a dark future looming on the horizon. All of that is a distant memory, sunken beneath the seas. Sailing the seas is exciting. You can almost feel the wind pass you by, denoted by the white lines trailing through the sky. The sea feels alive, teeming with sharks, octopi, peahats. Sometimes the sea is calm, sometimes it's bumpy, and sometimes you get caught up in the storm. Its day-night cycle shines brighter on the seas than it ever has, adventurous by day and calming by night. The time you spend sailing the seas makes every discovery all the more worthwhile. Filling your sea chart in square by square is a fulfilling process, and it's exciting to look at the full map by the end of it all, riddled with red circles where you've hauled up sunken treasures. I especially love cross-referencing treasure charts with your own sea chart to try to figure out where the X is pointing to. There's almost always something new to find when you set sail, and it helps fuel the pirate-esque flavor. Unfortunately, it's hard to look at this as anything but a flavor. Most of what you end up finding are rupees, a resource with an artificially inflated level of importance via a monotonous and unnecessary required endgame quest. Everything else is next to useless outside of getting a few heart pieces, so you'll often find yourself digging up a chest and finding nothing. I suppose that's part of the pirate life, eh? Not everything you dig up is going to rock your world, and perhaps it was necessary in order to keep the value of the really good treasures high. A bigger issue is that the Great Sea is not built to exist within the framework of a Metroidvania. It's not an open world. It's more or less built like all the old Zelda games. You go through a linear path of dungeons, retrieve their items, and use those items across the overworld to unlock more stuff. This is still what Ocarina built, even if it is masquerading as something else entirely. What that often means is that you'll come to an island, step foot on it, and realize there's nothing you can even do there. This happens so many times that it starts to become prudent to save it all for the very end. The hookshot, one of the last items you'll obtain, is used for so many secrets that you're almost shooting yourself in the foot trying to do stuff without it. Not to mention, that big rupee sink I mentioned, the Triforce quest, encompasses a bunch of random islands which have virtually no purpose outside of that required endgame quest. It's not as if you're encouraged to set out onto the seas and chart your own path. In fact, the opening is so restrictively linear that you're forced to go to Dragon Roost Cavern lest you incur the wrath of the King of Red Lions. For some reason, the required dungeon order is back in action in a game which desperately needed the return of a non-linear one. I suppose another trend Ocarina started is a more involved story, and the Wind Waker takes it to the next level with several events which need to happen in a specific order, forcing the rest of the adventure to follow suit. Since your every attempt to break free from this suffocating linearity is met with disappointment, you'll start to treat the Great Sea differently, as an oversized, fancy-looking overworld where you spend a hell of a lot of time doing nothing and finding nothing. Heart pieces are more valuable the more difficult the game, so when that's most of what you end up finding in the Wind Waker, one of the easiest entries, you start to wonder what the point of going after them even is, especially when they're hidden behind some of the absolute worst minigames and side quests the series has ever seen. The more I write about it, the easier it is to see why people assume I hate it. I say all of this with love, because I adore what the Wind Waker is trying to be, and there are times where it clicks into place. Hunting for the ghost ship is perfect. You have to look at the phases of the moon, cross-reference it with your ghost ship chart, find out how that corresponds with your own sea chart, and then find the ghost ship out on the seas somewhere. There are a lot of little mini-dungeons scattered across the seas that are fun to discover, as well as hidden alcoves on larger islands. I would say the spirit of exploration is still strong, it just falls wildly short of what it could have been. This was true for me back in 2017, before I played Breath of the Wild, and it's certainly true for me now, after playing Breath of the Wild. That game had to change so much about Zelda that in many ways, it ceased to resemble what so many of us considered the franchise to be. That was what it took to embody true freedom, and the Wind Waker was unwilling or perhaps unable to shed that DNA, which I think I would be more fine with if it executed that traditional Zelda feel in an extra satisfying fashion, but I don't really think it does. There's basically one dungeon I really enjoy here. The Wind Temple is great, the path forward is never obvious, it makes great use of many dungeon items, ferrying Makar through it all is fun, the boss is challenging with a memorable theme. It's unfortunate that the rest of the dungeons play it so safe, either having a painfully straightforward path or spitting you back out where you're supposed to go, turning it into a glorified hallway. I have gotten the question over the years, why do dungeons have to be so complicated? Which is, of course, simplifying the issue a bit. I clearly don't think straightforward progression is all bad, and not every dungeon needs to be confusing. These days I have a lot more appreciation for the Shadow Temple than I used to. It has fun room-to-room challenges and serves as a nice change of pace from the other dungeons. When I start asking for dungeons to be more confusing, it probably means that their simplicity is a hindrance in some way. In the case of the Wind Waker, there's usually not a lot going on in terms of stimulating puzzle design. The Tower of the Gods is very briefly about using the King of Red Lions to enter a few rooms, before it becomes a massive slog where you slowly guide statues around. It's relatively easy, so the combat and puzzles you solve here don't end up amounting to much. Shoot eye panels, avoid Beamos, maybe fight a Dark Nut or something. I feel like I'm on autopilot the whole way through. The Earth Temple's mirror puzzles are okay, but it feels more like a frustrating escort quest than it did for Makar. You're in a more enclosed space that doesn't take advantage of Medli's flight capabilities all too well, and you mostly use her to shine light on walls and statues. I suppose mirror shield puzzles have never been all too difficult, but the dungeons of the past which used it didn't make that part of its whole identity. There's a room in the Earth Temple with a bunch of statues you need to line up that feels so mind-numbingly simple that you spend less time thinking about what to do and more time very slowly pushing the blocks where they need to be. I suppose one solution could be to make the puzzles more interesting, asking you to do a lot more with the mechanic. However, a much easier way to make the dungeons more complex without changing any of the stuff you're asked to do in them is to make the path forward less obvious. Allow the player to access rooms that don't immediately lead somewhere, or make them backtrack every once in a while. The more options you give people, the more likely they are to have to think about the entire dungeon to make progress, like a mini Metroidvania. If the overworld and therefore the rest of the game can be structured like a Metroidvania, why can't the dungeons be as well? And again, I'm not entirely married to this idea of a dungeon. I'm not married to much of anything in Zelda. I'm actually open to the design structure of the two dungeon types that Breath of the Wild introduces, but as long as we're still talking about the Zelda dungeons which require keys and dungeon items to progress, they're probably going to have to do a lot more to stand out as anything other than boring distractions. It's difficult to talk about things like this without running into a potential disconnect, of course. Going back to Metroid Dread again, there were quite a lot of people who managed to get lost despite the game's best efforts. So much so that Mark Brown had to change his video title. The same is true of the Wind Waker's dungeons. Better yet, some people simply prefer knowing where to go and get frustrated when they find themselves lost. Clearly, dungeons are a huge deal either way. We might not always be able to agree on what makes them special, but what we can usually all agree on is that they are a very important aspect of the Zelda experience, and Ocarina set that trend in many ways. We can be very particular about them. Funny enough though, the randomizer ends up becoming a boon for the Wind Waker in the same way it was for Ocarina, but not for quite the same reasons. Ocarina is just small enough with so many glitches and tricks that a randomizer makes it more fun to speedrun. It's the opposite for the Wind Waker. I think there's a much more organic appeal to the randomizer, one that seems fairly obvious. If the rewards you find on the sea vary in their usefulness, progression is too straightforward, and dungeons lack the complexity which would make them stand out, why not randomize the items you get to solve all of that? Why not turn the Wind Waker into a scavenger hunt, giving more inherent value to the offshoot islands and minigames with the 49 sunken treasures? In a lot of ways, the randomizer is able to fulfill the title's true potential, embracing the freedom its approach should theoretically allow. It doesn't exactly make that initial playthrough any more exciting, but it does make it far, far more replayable. The randomizer's approach and how it contrasts the vanilla game feels like it mirrors the conflict of the story. Zelda stories are generally quite predictable. You play as Link, the chosen hero, who goes around collecting mystical objects, or in some cases people, collects the Master Sword and slays a great evil, as was often foretold by some prophecy. Zelda is very fond of its staples, and though there are obvious exceptions, the majority of them cover a lot of the same ground. It's a comfortable groove that clearly works no matter how many times it's retold. On the surface, this entry is seemingly no different. Stories are told of the hero of time who vanquished Ganondorf, yet vanished before the land could be saved from his tyranny. Thus did Hyrule fall, persisting through the legends passed down to their descendants. In other words, though there are slivers of tradition that remain, dressing young boys in the garb of the hero, this is not Hyrule. That land perished long ago. This is a new land, with new gods, new customs, and new dreams. The Zora have evolved to take flight, now delivering letters across the disparate islands. The Kokiri have become one with the forest, more closely resembling their great Deku tree. Between these islands is a vast stretch of water, teeming with possibilities. None of this has anything to do with history or prophecy at the outset. It's simply a boy searching for his sister and a group of pirates who see fit to help him do that. As we soon learn, those pirates are descendants of the royal line. Tetra is actually Princess Zelda, and the only reason Aryll is kidnapped is because Ganondorf is looking for young girls who might be Zelda. The King of Red Lions, a talking boat who helps you on your adventure, is revealed to be the King of Hyrule. For you see, Hyrule stirs beneath the ocean. Its evils still plague the world and threaten to suck everything in with it. So, as the legend tells, a brave boy clad in green must rise up and defeat that evil. Your first steps into Hyrule are chilling. Time stands still. Color has been drained from the land, and no music plays. This doesn't resemble the vibrancy of the surface in the slightest. It's cold, dead, a casket filled with long-forgotten souls. These depressing ruins are what we continue to fight over. There's a visible resistance to conformity in the Wind Waker. Link doesn't want anything to do with the tried-and-true green tunic, nor is he necessarily in it to save the world. He's here for his sister, and taking up the quest to defeat Ganon feels more like a way to pay back the King of Red Lions for helping out. Link, and by extension Tetra, are not in it because they are 2/3 of the Triforce. Tetra, the confident pirate captain, loses almost all of her personality and drive when she finds out that she's Zelda. The King of Red Lions wants to keep her locked away, while Link takes care of the rest. But it is so obvious that this goes against everything about her character. By the time you're confronting Ganondorf, she's sure as hell gonna fight with you. It's hard not to see this in a different light after reading what Aonuma had to say about the direction of the series by this point. Before The Wind Waker, Nintendo had the team make a realistic showcase for the tech, a demonstration Aonuma wasn't a big fan of. For him, it didn't feel like Zelda at all. One would assume, then, that the direction he took was what he ultimately preferred. I am admittedly unsure how much involvement he had with its script, but it seems almost too coincidental to me that The Wind Waker's central conflict centers around tradition. Is it proper to uphold it? What are the consequences of doing so? Ultimately, while it doesn't outright vilify the King of Red Lions, he was at least partly complicit in dragging these children into his mess. It's why I think he ends up forsaking tradition in favor of allowing Hyrule, and everything that came from it, to sink beneath the ocean. Maybe part of him realized that to yearn for the past, to try to instill those values into the children of a new generation, robbing them of the ability to choose their own future, he would have been no better than Ganondorf. I find there to be many expectations about what a Zelda game should be. At some point, it feels like we're basically asking every one of them to be the same thing, and it's no surprise that what we eventually got was a series that kept doing the same thing. The Wind Waker was one of the freshest steps outside of that typical model, proof that Ocarina's foundation may not have been quite so rigid, and it was met with a staggering degree of rejection. I don't blame people for wanting that either. Ocarina of Time set the stage for realistic fantasy, and here we are frolicking in the realm of Ghibli. Yet, history has been kind to the Wind Waker as more and more people look back on it with fondness. It's becoming increasingly more evident that they were right to move away from what was expected of them and follow their heart to whatever strange land it may have taken them to. It seems so silly to me that it was dismissed out of hand, but I suppose another phase of growth is to covet more mature experiences. Why spend time with this childish distraction when there's a whole new realm of edgier, more adult options that most of your friends are also interested in? The industry, and maybe even the devs, simply weren't ready for the kind of game the Wind Waker needed to be. It's one of the more sobering aspects of growing up. Sometimes, following your dreams doesn't quite pay off in the way that you'd hope. Sometimes people reject you for the strangest reasons, ones that you can't entirely understand. Ultimately, though, the courage you display in taking those bold steps forward, well, they speak for themselves. Someone out there is bound to appreciate that. Part of me feels a little guilty for loving Twilight Princess as much as I do, knowing that the people making it probably weren't too gung-ho about it. We have no proof, of course, and they actually seemed pretty into making a sequel to Twilight Princess before it was sent to the Crossbow Training's Shadow Realm. All we really know is that the team were set to make a direct sequel to The Wind Waker, which was met with hesitation by Nintendo of America, who could see that the style wasn't resonating with Western fans. Though it was Aonuma who approached Miyamoto to change course, I can't help but think back to his opinion on that tech demo. He didn't seem too keen on pursuing that direction, and so it seems to me that he bit the bullet for the sake of a commercially successful video game. But hey, I suppose whether or not they wanted to Twilight Princess means a lot to me either way. For a long time, I considered it my favorite Zelda, and I still think I did a pretty good job explaining why in my ancient video. Suppose then what I want to talk about here is the role nostalgia plays in all this. Twilight Princess came out when I was 8 years old. It wasn't one of the first games I played, but it was one I played very often. I'd bring it over to my friend's house all the time and we'd play it for hours together, seeing what we could discover. I continued to play and replay it for years to come until I made that video in 2017. As you can imagine, it has a lot of nostalgic value to me. Perhaps that would cause a great number of you to look at what I have to say about it with hesitancy. After all, I might be blinded by those emotions. Maybe it causes me to be less harsh on it and play up the strengths it has. It's an interesting debate, because surely nostalgia does have an effect on how we feel about the things we love. Getting a warm, fuzzy feeling inside while you're playing something is probably going to color your perspective to some extent. While it's universally treated as a bad thing, I do wonder just how potent nostalgia really is. How far does its reach extend? And what claims are we really willing to make about the people who are nostalgic for them? That they're lying? That their opinion is invalid? We all have nostalgia for something. As long as time continues to pass, we will always be nostalgic for something. So it seems a little silly to me that we wage these nostalgia wars when everyone has it inside of them to some extent, and there's essentially no way to combat those feelings. There's no way to tell how poisoned your mind is, nor is it really possible to tell how much those expectations were instilled into you at a young age. Why do we like the things that we like? It's a difficult, borderline philosophical question to answer. I have a theory about my own tastes, and I think Twilight Princess is to blame. My favorite thing about it will always be its atmosphere. I have not forgotten a single area, village, field, or dungeon. They all have a unique shade of melancholy, like that feeling you get when you're still awake at 3 in the morning. Everything around you at a standstill, the music fairly laid back, a mix of comfort and dread. I am pretty sure this is where my love of the macabre started. It is the reason why I adore Dark Souls. It's why I could spend hours in Hollow Knight's Underground. It's why I will go on any adventure with Samus Aran. No matter how many times I go back to Twilight Princess, it always hits me exactly the same as it used to. Which means I'm nostalgia blind, right? Well, I don't know. I've played plenty of video games throughout my life, some of which I played before Twilight Princess that I simply do not like as much. I played The Wind Waker before it, and that's one of my least favorites, so clearly, one of these inherently appealed to me more than the other. I think The City in the Sky is the reason I'm obsessed with floating islands. It's not necessarily that I have nostalgia for the location. I've played the game so many times that a lot of that has kind of faded. It was simply that flying up to this place for the first time and taking it all in had a massive effect on me. The entire journey was like that. I couldn't go 2 feet without being hit with something cool. I still love how quaint the beginning is. Herding goats, playing with the village children, catching fish, and then you're suddenly thrust into Hyrule Castle, which has been plunged into this unreal dimension with surreal music and otherworldly creatures. Nothing is ever guaranteed. The state of the world shifts on a dime. You eventually settle into a rhythm. You run around Twilight environments as a wolf, collect tears of light, cleanse the land, and then complete the dungeon. But even within those constraints, there's stuff happening all the time. Colin gets kidnapped by King Bulblin, and an epic fight ensues between you two. At the end of the Lanayru Tears of Light segment, when you expect everything to be over, you instead fight a mini-boss. Once you get the 3 fused shadows, Zant steals them and critically injures Midna. It's interesting to me that a lot of people see the Tears of Light as filler content, even though every time you start to collect them, you're in a completely new part of the map. They're the lead up to the dungeon we've come to expect in these games. You're just doing it as Wolf Link, admittedly. Wolf Link is not the most versatile fighter or anything, but I think it's fun trying to get around with his more limited tool set. What matters to me, anyway, is that if we're going to have such a suffocatingly linear progression, you have to make sure that the pacing is rock solid and that you're not spending too much time in between dungeons doing nothing. It's funny, despite having 5 pieces of heart to a container instead of 4, this game actually is one of the shortest and easiest to fully complete. It doesn't rely too much on bullshit minigames, nor does it have long, boring traversal. The map is about as big as it needs to be, There are just enough caves and alcoves to not overwhelm, with a ton of dungeons to explore. It flows almost as well as Ocarina, since it follows the most unashamedly in its footsteps. This title sets up an entire faction of invaders, led by Zant and Ganondorf, while also filling its version of Hyrule with lovable misfits who all end up being relevant in your fight against this threat. This may also be where my love of involved grand stories came from. Really though, I just think it's a joy to exist in this world. It might be drab, but I think that's exactly how they wanted it to feel. Quiet, bleak, depressing, which is certainly a hell of a way to follow up the Wind Waker. While I do think it's a step back from Ocarina in a few ways, I largely think it is a more direct evolution of it. An equal amount of focus was placed into the dungeon design to make each one stand out. One complaint levied towards Twilight Princess is that your items are not used very often outside of the dungeon you obtain them in, but I guess I've never seen that as an altogether bad thing. The Lakebed Temple has you using a bunch of different items: water bombs, the Zora tunic, and the claw shot. The dungeon is there to make the absolute most out of those items before moving on to the next set, and even then, you do still use the iron boots fairly frequently. In fact, the late game dungeons have you using more of your arsenal than you'd probably expect. The City in the Sky still has unique uses for the iron boots, bow, gale boomerang, spinner, and the claw shot before you unlock the double claw shot. It feels like there was a concerted effort, at least later on in the game, to make your tools multi-purpose. It leans into its linearity, taking advantage of the fact that every player will have the same set of items at all times. The only dungeon item I forgot about was the ball and chain, and even that one has some fun use cases in the Snow Peak Mansion, at the very least. I suppose I care much more about how each dungeon is designed individually, which means the amount of uses an item gets in said dungeon doesn't really matter to me. I care far more about how the Lakebed Temple forces you to think laterally to solve its shifting water level puzzles. It's reminiscent of Ocarina, but clearly an evolution of the concept, where here you need to spin a central bridge in 4 different directions to get the water flowing where you need it to. Like the Shadow Temple, the Temple of Time is a wholly linear track focused on room-to-room challenges, but the twist of the concept is that the midpoint of the dungeon has you controlling a statue and ferrying it backwards, clearing out all the obstacles that gave you trouble. Each dungeon has a unique mechanical feeling alongside a kick-ass theme. It is my opinion that this is the peak of Zelda's dungeon design and a culmination of everything the team had learned up to this point. They're a perfect blend of audio-visual theming, mechanical identity, and labyrinthine design. At this point in the series, I think it would be easy to see why the dungeons are so beloved. There isn't a lot else like them in other games. These highly curated labyrinths that feel like a cross between a puzzle box and a set piece, transporting you into a pocket dimension where you have to play by its rules. I think what completes the majesty of the Twilight Princess experience for me is the spectacle of it all. In between dungeons, there are a lot of exciting things happening, but they don't even come close to the stuff you end up doing in dungeons. With the exception of like the first 2, the end boss is almost always this larger-than-life monstrosity that you somehow need to take down. Morpheal is a perfect example of this. They make you slowly descend into its impossibly huge arena, juxtaposed by the wriggling little tentacle you see at its base resembling Morpha. Of course, this isn't all you're fighting. It squirms its head out of the sand, revealing many more tentacles and a giant mouth with razor-sharp teeth. The fight is about tracking down the eye through the various tentacles, grappling it to you, and then beating the hell out of it. They throw a few water bombs at you, pick you up and eat you with their tentacles, but it's nothing you haven't handled before. Until you reach the midpoint. Suddenly, you realize why the arena was so big. It needed to house this fucker. The fight shifts gears, and now it's about trying to keep up with this Goliath of a sea serpent and attach yourself to its eye, where you begin to down it Shadow of the Colossus style. The pace of the fight may have become more frantic, but the music is keeping up with you. The dynamic soundtrack is extremely underrated, as you bounce between its heightened Phase 2 theme and the triumphant strike its weak point stinger as you reach its eyeball. It really feels like you're trading blows with a titan, and hearing this when you finally fell it sends a surge of satisfaction straight to your brain. the weight they lend to this third temple boss is about on par with the scale of what a final boss would offer, and that's how most of the bosses feel. There's a first phase, which is usually pretty tame. You pass its puzzle, strike at its weak point, until you reach its second phase. This is where a twist occurs. The sand is drained out of Star-Lord's room, Argarok's armor falls off, or even the inverse, where Armagoma hangs on by a hair, at which point the fight takes on a completely different feel. Whether it's spinning up the edge of a spiral cylinder, or claw-shotting high into the sky and smashing the boss back down to the ground, Twilight Princess rarely misses. It takes that energy into the endgame and sprints to the finish line. I have yet to see a Zelda game end as strongly as this one, and it feels like the apex of what this team had been building towards, the product of their immense growth. It's able to produce exactly the atmosphere required of it. The Palace of Twilight feels oppressively lonely, the vibe of the Twilight areas you previously visited, but also the wellspring of that energy. Simply existing here makes it all the more obvious why Midna was so entranced by the Realm of Light. Her world was built to be a prison for her people, after all. Zant rests at the end of all this, the foreboding menace who's thwarted you at nearly every step of the journey. You expect this Ganondorf-level presence, the Twilight Usurper, but instead, we get a mask-off moment that's always stuck with me. A lot of people view this as a surprise Ganondorf twist, which robs Zant of his spot as the primo villain, but I've never quite viewed it that way. While I generally would prefer Zelda to move away from Ganon and explore more original villains like Majora's Mask and Vati, I do still think Zant serves his role as main villain dutifully until the end, even if his role is one-upped by Ganondorf, learning of his true nature, that he's basically a jealous madman, a mere shadow of Ganondorf's burning rage. It makes for an even scarier encounter. This dark, twisted version of Aonuma is where they decide to do their boss rush. But instead of simply making you fight everything again for no reason, we get a Zantified version of every boss, complete with remixed music, harder mechanics, and an injection of the most unpredictable energy you could ever imagine. Seriously, the song is like 6 minutes long with 7 different phases, and you never know what's coming next. It's one of my favorite Zelda tracks, with each phase introducing a weird set of very loud, obnoxious distortions. Like Zant himself, the song keeps you guessing, until he presumably gets tired of dealing with you and throws everything away in a last-ditch effort to kill you. There are points at the end here where you cannot keep track of him. It might not be the creeping dread you've come to expect from all the build-up, but it does fit the unhinged terror of Majora's Mask. Makes you wonder if these two things are connected. What I love about this, though, is that even after defeating Zant, you're only about halfway through the endgame, and it isn't interested in letting off the gas. They throw so much at you. Midna donning the fused shadows and breaking the seal on Hyrule Castle. The Resistance banding together to help you one last time. Your final match against King Bulblin, where he deems you stronger than anyone he has yet faced. All the while, you're in Hyrule Castle, yet another proper dungeon that maintains the somber tone you've come to expect. As you climb the tower portion, Ganon's influence grows louder and louder. Maybe it's a trick Ocarina pulled, arguably with more charm, but it's a trick that works nonetheless. He knows you're approaching, but he's content to wait for you. After all, he's not in any rush. What follows is probably still the most exhilarating finale of any game I've ever played. A 4-phase fight, each of them with their own unique theme. You contend with Phantom Zelda, a quaint yet traditional battle of energy tennis, before he throws off the gloves and immediately transforms into his Dark Beast form, which you naturally fight using your own Dark Beast form. A parallel I hadn't even drawn until writing this. When he gets tired of that form, he summons his iconic steed, and you team up with Zelda to take him down, as you help her aim the bow of light. Again, each phase has its own music, its own distinct feel, and it's all been building up to this final showdown. Once again, we circle back. This is the game that made me fall in love with duels. Well, it was either this or Revenge of the Sith. This image of a Twilight backdrop, Link and Ganondorf sizing each other up, we get a return of the dynamic boss theme, where this epic duel energy is intercut with a sudden jolt of adrenaline when your blades clash. It's not a particularly hard fight, nor is it really a particularly hard game, and yet the feelings it manages to instill within me are second to none. I will never be able to look at this as anything other than the coolest shit of all time. And yeah, Maybe that is the nostalgia in me talking. It's impossible for me to know how much weight those memories have over me. Do I speak more highly of them because they were formative memories? Well, I'd like to posit an alternative theory. Perhaps Twilight Princess is just such an impressive game that out of the dozens of them I played as a child, it happened to be the one to almost single-handedly dictate what my tastes would be going forward. Ultimately, there has to be something inherent to it that made it feel so special to begin with. And perhaps those feelings were heightened by my relative lack of experience, but I had to draw upon that hype from somewhere, after all. I may harbor a suspicion that this is never what Aonuma or his team truly wanted. I don't know if I'll ever truly be rid of that assumption. Yet, it is still clearly the culmination of everything they had been building up to this point. Occasionally, when I'm making a video or looking back at a wildly successful one, I often wonder to myself how this is going to end up being the video to go viral. What do people see in this? I certainly feel that way about my older Zelda videos, which people still watch and enjoy. I wonder if Aonuma and his team think similarly about their older Zelda projects. At the end of the day, though, those opinions are simply out of their hands and mine. While I may never understand what people see in those old videos, the fact that people see something in them is undeniable. I cannot refute it, no matter how much I want to. Thus, the work speaks for itself. We like to think of growth as this straight line that only goes up, but in reality, there are almost always several dips on that path. In feeling out who you want to be, you're not always going to arrive at the correct answer. After all, one must experiment with all manner of different approaches before you're able to find the best one for you. Zelda is much the same. Each title, while reminiscent of what came before, always did something no one could have expected of it. Whether the audience approved of it or not, Zelda is not afraid to travel down the road less walked. As a result, it's often able to craft experiences we simply cannot get anywhere else. I say this all as a resident defender of Skyward Sword. I don't bear any ill will toward it. I think it offers up a few new exciting changes to the series that would even go on to influence Breath of the Wild, so it certainly wasn't an unnecessary step. But even I could admit that it seems confused. On paper, everything seems normal. This is the game which sits at the beginning of the Zelda timeline. There are more cutscenes here than there have ever been, headed up by a new writer who previously worked on the Oracle games Minish Cap and Phantom Hourglass. There are overworlds to explore, dungeons to find, items to collect, and bosses to fell, all of which are completed in a linear order. That is exactly what Skyward Sword seems to be, just another Zelda game. Dig a little deeper though, and you'll find quite possibly one of the most compromised titles in the franchise. There are only 3 major areas outside of the sky based on the 3 goddesses who created the world. There's a forest, a volcano, and a desert. Some variance is included within those biomes, like a lake, but for the most part you're stuck visiting and revisiting 3 generic environments, which I suppose is par for the course with Zelda. It's not like I really expect much else. But the amount of time you spend in each area makes them feel even more bland. We've gone from one of the best paced Zeldas to one of the worst, which is aggravating because it seems like a priority was placed on making your moment-to-moment gameplay more engaging than it had ever been. To call these areas overworlds in the traditional sense feels a little disingenuous. These are areas with the same care put into their level design as you'd expect from the series' dungeons. There are platforming challenges to complete, enemies and mini-bosses to fight, all as a lead-up to that area's dungeon. These are areas chock full of stuff to find, outside of your usual range of rupees and heart pieces. You can find treasures to upgrade your items, or bugs to craft strong potions, some of which are hidden in secret rooms, making them a lot of fun to explore. I do stand by it having some of the worst pacing of any Zelda, but I can't deny that I get sucked into its gameplay loop every single time. No matter how much I hate revisiting the forest for the third time and hunting for Tadtones, part of me has to admire just how many ideas they were able to cram into this title. It doesn't come together in a coherent way, yet I can tell the creative juices were flowing nonetheless, and that the team were starting to break away from the typical mold. Aonuma stated that he wanted to shatter the process they had developed for making these games after Twilight Princess, and gave director Hidemaru Fujibayashi free rein to change whatever he wanted about it. Essentially, they gave themselves a little more freedom to step outside of the box they had struggled within since the release of Ocarina of Time, in the hopes that they could once again create something with the impact that game once had. All that mattered was that the spirit of Zelda remained intact, a guiding philosophy I can wholeheartedly respect. What we ended up with here is more of a half step than a full dive. We may have gotten a radically different Zelda, but that mostly came down to its new control scheme. It was still a linear adventure Metroidvania sitting atop Ocarina's foundation. I think we take for granted how miraculous video games truly are, that so many talented developers are able to put their all into making something great. The idea that they're going to bat 100 every time is completely unrealistic. Skyward Sword is a rare, unapologetic showcase of them making experimental changes to see which of them ended up working. There were mixed results to this approach. Turning the overworld into an extension of the dungeons, having them be their own puzzles to solve, was a nice change. Other ideas, like the decision to make the sky into a Mario-esque overworld and turn the various areas into a glorified level select, maybe weren't so spectacular. This seems like it was tailor-made for me. A game that takes place above the clouds where you fly around on giant birds and explore sky islands like the Wind Waker. That's like my dream game. That's a game I want to make. This is not that game, not even close, because the sky isn't to be explored, it's a level select. There are maybe 1 or 2 interesting rocks, and the rest is completely barren. It makes the Wind Waker's Great Sea look magnificent by comparison. It actually begins to annoy me when I'm forced to explore the sky for goddess chests. Nevertheless, it's a consequence of the approach Aonuma and his team wanted to take with Zelda. I've always found this quote from him fascinating. I generally don't try to take into account the player's expectations of what they want from a Zelda game when making a new one. The reason for that is, players don't necessarily know what they want. We need to be able to surprise them. So where we put a lot of our focus is on creating these new experiences that are going to make the game feel fresh and different. I don't know if this was the intention, but this statement is displaying a lot of vulnerability. It's telling players that they don't want to conform. They'd instead like to chart their own rocky path in the hopes that what they end up making is able to give fans something they never knew they wanted. Of course, that mantra isn't always going to work, it's a risky proposition, and yet, isn't it true that the craziest ideas, the riskiest ones, are necessary to create truly unforgettable experiences? Perhaps that's why I'm less harsh on Skyward Sword. I appreciate how different it feels from the other 3D Zelda games. A lot of people don't like how everything feels like a puzzle, but I think it adds a fresh layer to your exploration. Combat has never quite been the series' strong suit, and I think Skyward Sword was the first significant step forward, if only for being much more challenging. Maybe it doesn't resemble what we traditionally expect from Zelda combat, feeling much more like a reaction-based puzzle, but I thought it made each encounter more interesting. That level select approach completely destroys the narrative pacing, but it also meant that I never quite knew what it was going to ask of me next. You can see the ideas that would eventually influence Breath of the Wild in their infancy here. Diving down into Elden Volcano, only to be thrown in prison with all of your items stolen and forced to re-explore the area in a severely weakened state. Were it not the third time we'd touched down in this region, I have a feeling people would have been more receptive to it. This did not happen in prior Zeldas. You had to have an overworld. That overworld needed to be structured like a Metroidvania. There could never be anything else going on. By adopting this level select structure, the developers were able to do things like make an explorable sand sea that you visit in both the past and the future. It can also backfire. I don't know a single person who enjoys searching for Tadtones. Experimentation isn't sexy. We tend to look at this and think to ourselves, wow, they were really running out of ideas for this one, which isn't wrong. Technically, they had run out of ways to make Ocarina's ideas continually fresh. I don't agree that them feeling out what a Zelda could be was a creatively bankrupt move, even if they clearly couldn't decide on how to make it all fit together within their development timeframe. So much of what's wrong with Skyward Sword, in my view, has more to do with the pressure they clearly felt to pad out its length. It feels like they came up with a story which couldn't possibly cover the amount of gameplay ideas they had. It feels like they didn't have enough areas, enemies, or bosses. It feels like it is literally bursting at the seams, held together by duct tape and glue. You can peer directly into its beating heart, your third time fighting the imprisoned. It's a really well-written skeleton of a story, one which seeks to explain the origins of the Master Sword, of the Triforce, of the cycles of reincarnation and destiny, and chiefly, of two dorky lovebirds. Link and Zelda have been given so much care and attention, Link's portrayal in particular probably being one of my favorites. Silent protagonists are often hard to work with, and I generally don't like them, but I enjoy when Zelda is able to give Link a little more personality. In my opinion, we're past the days of him being a link between the player and the game. He has clearly become a character in his own right, even if a lot of his characterization is still malleable. There are great moments peppered throughout, with Groose stealing his fair share of the limelight, but it's often difficult to appreciate that story when it moves at the speed of molasses. You reach a new area, you look for Zelda, it leads you to a dungeon, you don't meet up with her or she leaves, and then you return to the sky to find your next dungeon. Then, you get some actual information about how Zelda is in the past. Impa says you can go meet her, except before you do that, you need to power up the Master Sword, which you can only do by finding 3 of the Goddess Flames. So you go do all of that for a while, until you're finally able to speak with Zelda. You get a lore dump about how she's the reincarnation of Hylia, and that you forged the Master Sword in an effort to seal away Demise. At this point, all you have to do is confront him. But you also need to go find the Triforce, and the only way to do that is to speak to a being who has been around long enough to know where it's been hidden. You find him, fight him, rid him of Demise's corruption, and what does he tell you to do? To go to 3 major areas, speak with the sacred dragons, and have them assemble a song that will give you access to the Triforce. And so, when the game asks you to swim around looking for tad tones, it does feel somewhat insulting. Yet the end of the journey hits all of the same beats you'd expect. The epic, multi-phase final fight against Demise and Girahim, who mirror Link and Fi. The music here is incredible. This will always be one of my favorite Zelda soundtracks. The fight against Demise lives rent-free in my head. It looks like the fucking final world from Kingdom Hearts, except Demise bends it to better fit his energy. It's a challenging fight with an incredible score, making great use of the finishing blow. The individual moments are all great, what you'd expect of Zelda at this point. They just can't fit within the constraints of a game that already can't fit its ideas into such a small surface area, which is a shame, since it means that some of the more interesting components don't get the time they deserve. I think it's cute that Link and Zelda are more romantically involved, giving you more of a motivation to search for her. That relationship isn't explored as anything other than a flavor, since the majority of Zelda's screen time is dedicated to her running away with Impa or delivering exposition. Fucking Groose gets more development than anyone else, which isn't entirely unwelcome. We all love him. It's just disappointing. It's tricky. I think Zelda stories are very important. Despite what I may have said in the past, I truly believe this series has a unique grasp on storytelling. Many of these games let their world design and mechanics tell their own stories. Ocarina and Majora through their time travel, The Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild through their takes on the post-apocalypse, Twilight Princess through its oppressive atmosphere. Exposition exists in all of these games to some extent, but most of them let their words and mechanics do the talking for them, which is why Skyward Sword feels a bit like a black sheep. Too often, the places you're exploring feel like video game levels, either due to the way they've been designed or the degree to which they've been rigidly delineated. I can't tell you many interesting things about 2 of its major provinces, nor would I really care to know. The Lanayru province is, of course, the exception, which does a much better job letting its mechanics do the heavy lifting. The time shift stones are a wonderful window into the past, telling some wonderful smaller stories, while still prompting so many questions about what happened here. How many years have passed? Who built these robots? The dungeons, a mining facility and a giant ship, are also much more thematically resonant than a bunch of scattered temples. Ultimately, there is a reason you're going to all these areas. Hylia built them all to have the hero of legend forge the Master Sword and seal away Demise. It's just a very unexciting one, which renders the world a series of video game levels. I can't really blame anyone for looking at it as anything other than a mess, not fit to exist in the same sphere as the other Zeldas, but I think I and many others have come around on it in part because these days, it really does feel like the end of an era for 3D Zelda. It seems like it was actually the final time they would make a 3D Zelda like this, a 3D Zelda based on Ocarina of Time. It was the last time we'd see heavily curated puzzle box dungeons, which I'd argue are some of the strongest in the series. The Ancient Cistern is a fan favorite for a reason. It plays like a prototype divine beast, and there's a central mechanic you need to play with to progress. The Sand Ship has a similar structure, where you have to find ways to turn the ship forward and back in time, involving a lot of unorthodox thinking. These are ideas you're only allowed to act upon when you restrict the player in the way that classic 3D Zelda did. It's a lot more difficult to pull off when your goal is to give players as much freedom as humanly possible. For a lot of people, I think part of the disappointment in the Divine Beasts was due to the previous games having much longer, more challenging dungeons, which took up a much larger chunk of playtime. And I can't exactly blame people for missing that format. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with Zelda. But I think to a certain extent, an aspect of growing up is letting go, moving on. That's the impression I get from the people making Skyward Sword. This was the limit of what they could achieve with 3D Zelda. It was necessary to re-examine what the series could be in order to allow it to evolve, which doesn't suddenly make it this underrated masterpiece, but it does offer some much-needed perspective. There's a kind of beauty in the broken. Scattered pieces of something probe the imagination. You want to picture where this piece may have gone, what it might have contributed to. The fact that you're looking at a broken thing suggests that it was not meant to last. It was created to serve some sort of function that is no longer necessary. At the end of the day, all things break. Given enough time, enough pressure, no matter how solid the foundation once was, it will break. Breath of the Wild is the supernova of impermanence. While taking inspiration from the franchise's roots, it is difficult to look at as anything other than a radical departure in every possible way. It completely shattered what people knew Zelda to be, a decision that was critically and financially rewarded. The gulf between it and the rest of the series financially is astronomical. So why, then, is there a not insignificant desire to turn back the clock? Why did so many people want Tears of the Kingdom to walk back those radical decisions and resemble something closer to those older titles? Simple. For as much beauty as we find in brokenness, there exists in many of us an even stronger desire to repair, to set things back to the way they used to be, when they were familiar. Here's the cold, hard truth. Everything has a shelf life, and that shelf life exists for a reason. For the universe to maintain its natural order, energy must be finite. Fires will flicker and die. Batteries will lose their charge, because that is the will of the universe. It is impermanent. An idea is much the same. There's only so far it can go before it loses its meaning. This is a truth that is difficult to accept, as it means acknowledging that something you loved has fulfilled its purpose. It is in the past, and there is no going back. To many, that is what Breath of the Wild represents. The guillotine with which classic 3D Zelda was beheaded. All we can hope for now is to attach all the bits we used to love onto this new thing, like some kind of Frankenstein's monster of desire. In wishing for those things, though, there's an implication that Breath of the Wild lacks something inherent to Zelda, that somewhere along the way it lost the franchise's spirit. That doesn't sit right with me. For you see, what remains in the rubble may not resemble the Zelda I fell in love with. It's missing the little bibs and bobs I used to play with. The sounds it makes are warped. I can hold it in my hands and feel how different it is. Nevertheless, there's a kind of beauty in the broken. Nothing is meant to last forever, as much as we often desire it. The idea that a franchise will continue, or that a dead one has a duty to resurface, is a prevalent notion in games discourse. There's a sense of security in that idea. But for the franchises which have lasted, the ones that have been successful throughout time, friction becomes inevitable. There will always be people who grow frustrated with their directions. The longer they last, the more likely this becomes, especially if that franchise means a lot to people. Zelda has existed for over 35 years. It inches closer every year to having been a thing for half of a century. These entries mean a lot to a lot of people and have each evolved in their own way. They have stories and worlds people will remember for the rest of their lives. For most of its existence, it followed a fairly rigid pattern. That formula may have itself changed, become more linear, focused more on grand narratives, but this is an experience people could come to take comfort in. No matter what, every Zelda that released would at least provide them this. Yet, there was also a brewing frustration. Consistency can breed predictability. Some grew bored of this idea. I think even the folks making Zelda were tired of following their own conventions. You don't get a bold statement like Breath of the Wild from nothing. There's a pressure that builds the longer a franchise continues. New games will come out, they will make new fans and lose old ones. Those who remain either grow closer to or more upset with all of it, and those feelings compound with every new release. The farther you get from that initial title, the more you deviate from that starting line, the more you're bound to create several new starting lines along the way. Before you know it, you're as mangled as Sonic the Hedgehog, where basically any fan you talk to has a different idea as to what makes him special. Zelda was doing a pretty decent job righting the ship through the storm of expectation. Ironically, the more they stayed the course, the more tired people became. This is likely what the team behind Zelda were thinking when tackling Breath of the Wild. They wanted something fresh, something that could rekindle the flame of creation. In order to do that, though, they had to pinpoint the root of suffering and shatter it. The wear and tear of time is a powerful force. Age makes us physically weaker, but it often gives us perspective in exchange. Looking back at what Ocarina of Time built, it was an impressive structure, the tour de force of action-adventure. Nintendo were keen to continue iterating on those ideas for years to come. Skyward Sword approached the breaking point. In an era of the open world, where player freedom dominated the industry, was Zelda truly living up to its full potential? Hidemaru Fujibayashi and his team decided that it was time to rethink those conventions, build a new foundation. In order to achieve this, they'd have to wreck everything. Walls could no longer be impassable, progression could no longer be guided, the experience could no longer be predetermined. Is there a way to make a game with so many potential solutions that there won't be one answer you can find on the internet? Is it possible to create an experience that will be different for every player? A world that will dynamically react to your decisions? Those were the types of questions the team needed to ask themselves if they were going to make the transition. Past games, no matter how much they varied in their levels of freedom, had a predetermined order of events. There was some variance in dungeon order, but every player had more or less the same playthrough. The trade-off, of course, was a more fulfilling narrative experience. It was easier to give characters more screen time, to mythologize, to raise the stakes. The devs could craft a wonderful theme park ride for the player to enjoy. Breath of the Wild sacrificed those strengths by making it possible for the player to confront Calamity Ganon the very moment they leave the Great Plateau. This is an earth-shattering change, more than you might initially realize. A lot of people say that this is harkening back to the days of the original Legend of Zelda, embracing the freedom its approach allowed. While that is true to some extent, and the team even took direct inspiration from it, I think it's important to remember that Zelda 1 set a lot of the tenets the rest of the series would follow. Though you had a lot of freedom to do dungeons out of order, they were all still necessary to complete in order to collect the Triforce. Those dungeons had items you needed to access secrets and finish other dungeons, meaning that you had to see most of its content to reach the end. Zelda has never quite been built like Breath of the Wild. You are required to finish the Great Plateau, collect the Sheikah Slate runes, learn a little about the calamity which befell Hyrule from King Rome, and then fight Calamity Ganon. Those are the only events which are required of anyone. The rest of the video game is completely up to you. Should you head to Kakariko Village like King Rome suggested, or should you wander the broken land and make your own way? They're able to get away with this because of Link's amnesia. Though he is slightly characterized by in-game diaries, for the first time in a long time, Link feels like a link to the player character. You've woken up in a post-apocalyptic world, one you no longer have any memory of. Every inch of that world is teeming with possibility, so it would make sense that you'd be eager to explore it and see what it has to offer. However, it would also make sense that you'd be concerned about recovering your lost memories and taking care of Calamity Ganon. What's important for this setup is that nothing is forced upon you. There's not necessarily an impending doom, since the calamity happened 100 years ago. You're living in the aftermath, and though his forces still roam the land, his power can never truly be unleashed thanks to Zelda. Because of that, you can essentially go do whatever you want without judgment. Calamity Ganon needs to be stopped eventually, but who says you can't put it all on pause and smell the roses? In its totality, it has about as much story content as any other Zelda. There are a bunch of new characters, a big world with a rich history, and plenty of danger lurking around every corner. It's a setup fitting for a post-apocalypse story, immersing you in Hyrule's past and present struggles. Yet, it has not been looked back on all too favorably when compared to previous entries. You learn more about Hyrule by visiting its various settlements, meeting their characters, and helping them with their problems. For the most part, it's about quelling a divine beast, but occasionally, it's about building a house, or an entire town. This stuff is more traditional Zelda fare, where you meet a character, go through a linear build-up section to a dungeon, complete said dungeon, and move on to the next area. You do this 4 times until all of the champions are on your side. In terms of pacing and length, these sections feel a little different than they would in the past. The dungeons aren't very long or complicated, so they're pretty easy to get in and out of, with boss fights that are merely extensions of Calamity Ganon. The build up to the dungeon is the same every time, and the resolution is extremely swift. There aren't mini dungeons to do first, nor are there lengthy story segments to break everything up. You walk away from them all with a feeling that there could have been more, perhaps because you're being forced to seek that story out on your own time. Maybe also because Yunobo sucks and feels like a waste of life. The more traditionally harrowing stuff happened 100 years ago, so the memories you uncover from that time are the real draw. However, those memories can not only be experienced in any order, they also depict completely random events. The pace at which you uncover these memories is entirely up to chance. You find them by matching your photo album with the environment, and if you're not actively hunting for them, that means you'll be getting a couple minutes of a cutscene plucked out of a hat several hours apart. Alternatively, if you unlock them back to back, it will feel unsatisfying since you get a very abridged version of events. Nonetheless, it does feel necessary to decouple these scenes from your progression, to make them yet another collectible you can happen across. The devs wanted players to be able to go anywhere they wanted at any time they wanted, and always have something to do. This is a massive change, as it eliminates the general rhythm of Zelda progression. Your major items, the Sheikah runes, are given to you on the Great Plateau. You will never obtain another required item. They needed to ensure that you could be doing something no matter where you went, that there would be something you'd be drawn to as you wandered. Shrines, Korok puzzles, and side quests were introduced to fulfill that purpose. To fill in the cracks between those activities, you could collect bugs, minerals, and other materials to use in cooking or upgrading your armor. I mean, hell, weapons and armor exist now. An actual reward structure that doesn't solely revolve around how many hearts you have. Now that there are stat numbers given to your offense and defense, that means enemies need to scale like they would in an RPG. You're able to give yourself attack and defense buffs using certain armor sets or by cooking meals. Technically, Zelda has had damage progression before. Upgrading your sword would make you do more damage, and very briefly in A Link to the Past, upgrading your tunic made you take less damage. There were defense upgrades and magic armors, but for the most part, Zelda has never really been about numbers. Now, it is. It's dipped its toes ever so slightly into the RPG pool. You spend more time in menus reading what your equipment will do to Link, or what your materials will combine to make when cooking. This means there's more inherent downtime, thinking about what items you might need to gather for your next upgrade, or what food you should bring for the next encounter. You can see how these fundamental changes compound on each other. The necessity for one pillar to break is the necessity for another, until the whole house crumbles. Meditation is a more subtle theme of Breath of the Wild. All of its denizens are at odds with something, reluctant to accept inevitable changes. 10,000 years ago, the Sheikah introduced wondrous new technologies that helped seal away Calamity Ganon. They had allegedly helped the king numerous times in the past with their wisdom, yet the king of Hyrule ordered their technology discarded, fearful of its potential threat to the kingdom. As we see in the present, this technology is far ahead of its time. Robotic constructs, what might as well be modern-day tablets, powerful armor and weaponry. If allowed to continue, civilization may have been able to better prepare for Calamity Ganon's eventual return. Instead, 10,000 years passed, and Hyrule progressed not a single inch. People still ride on the backs of horses, they farm using rudimentary medieval tools. Despite its long history, nothing of note seems to have happened in the many millennia since Ganon was sealed. No thought was put into what the kingdom would do if he ever returned, showcased by the fact that Hyrule only dug up the ancient Sheikah tech in response to a prophecy which warned of his return. They sought to prepare for the calamity by following tradition. In the days of old, there was a hero who held the Master Sword, a princess with the light of Hylia, and an army of guardians. They sought to resurrect the tech used to beat back Calamity Ganon, without considering the philosophy which made that victory possible. Embracing change, allowing humanity to move forward, was what kept Ganon at bay. Fear of change, the casting out of the Sheikah and their technology, is what would eventually cause the downfall of that same kingdom. Hate, fear, jealousy, anger. Without protections, those desires can worm their way into just about anyone, anything. Calamity Ganon may have been sealed, but the malice that he represented can never truly be eradicated. The longer it's left to fester, the more potent its power becomes. And so, Hyrule fell. You don't learn much about Hyrule as it existed a century ago. You see it now, a dilapidated husk of its former self. You'll walk into what used to be a bustling town square as you wade through the wreckage for food and weapons. The people alive today didn't live through the calamity. They don't think about it as anything other than a historical event. What Ganon did a century ago doesn't matter anymore. Hyrule has moved on. There is no one left who can oppose Ganon, and his damage has already been done, so his influence has become a part of the world. People mostly exist within the small settlements where they can be protected, and those who do venture out know how dangerous it is. Despite living in a post-apocalypse, the people you meet are driven by their own interests. They're into shield surfing, horseback riding, and archaeology. They build houses, they make families, they persist in the face of evil, unburdened by the past. Those with longer life expectancies, who lived through the calamity, like many of the Zora, have hung on to that bitter resentment. They project those feelings onto everyone around them, living miserable lives and unknowingly spreading Ganon's malice. Through these interactions, you get to learn a bit more about the relationship between the Zora and the Hylians. You learn about the Gerudo culture, its prohibition of vows, and the link it may have to Ganondorf. You see firsthand the impact the champions had on their people. Their mythical legacies cast a tall shadow on those who wish to follow in their footsteps. There is a persistence here. Those who still exist are slowly but surely clearing away the rubble. The threat of Calamity Ganon is always looming, but that doesn't inherently invite despair. People have learned to be mindful, to concern themselves with only what they can control. As fragile as life can be, as easily as the life of the champions and so many others were snuffed out by Ganon, the capacity for life to bounce back is strong. So strong that even the dead cling to their regrets. One of my favorite parts of the Great Plateau is following King Rome around. He's living a reclusive, peaceful life up here. He cuts down trees, dabbles in cooking, and he's even built a log cabin. He's a bright and wonderful presence to introduce you to this world. It's a far cry from what we see of him in Link's memories, probably part of his own penance as the late king who failed his kingdom. His focus was on something no one had any control over. He was disappointed in Zelda for not awakening her sealing powers, despite neither of them truly understanding how to awaken them. He surrounded her with champions, each with their own unique set of skills, yet he denied her the ability to pursue her own. He allowed her insecurities to take hold of her, and that self-doubt may have been part of the reason she was unable to awaken her powers until it was too late. Here he is now, eager to right his wrongs and usher a reborn Link into a journey of discovery through this ruined land. The experience of playing Breath of the Wild and the pleasures derived from it depends on your expectations of it. There is a lot to see and do in this beautiful world. The speed at which you comb through it and what you choose to focus on during this adventure will likely dictate how you feel about this new approach. There is a kind of player who simply wants to follow the path laid out for them. They make their way to Kakariko Village, talk to Impa, and start their quest to deactivate the divine beasts. Maybe they'll do a shrine here and there, bolster their health, grab better weapons and armor. For the most part though, they'll be bouncing from dungeon to dungeon, collecting memories along the way, maybe even finding the Master Sword. They'll make their way to Hyrule Castle, slay Calamity Ganon, and leave the experience rather underwhelmed. I have a suspicion that this is not how it was meant to be explored. I think the game is inviting players to be mindful of their surroundings, to drift towards whatever looks most interesting at any given time, to study their environment, to notice the intricate behaviors of the various monsters, to watch the wind blow through the blades of grass, to appreciate the view at the peak of a mountain. Breath of the Wild represents the push and pull between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation in its most condensed form. There's a way to look at it as a set of objectives: 120 shrines, 900 Koroks, 4 divine beasts, 13 recoverable memories, 4 great fairies. As much as Breath of the Wild revolutionized the open world genre, if you look at it a certain way, there is very little separating it from the checklist-ridden sandboxes it now accompanies. For fans of Zelda, this is a fundamental shift in play philosophy. If you're a fan of, say, Twilight Princess, you'll probably be going into this with the expectation that the dungeons and story are the most worthwhile parts of the experience. The rest of the game's content will be akin to the Agatha Bug side quest or a few side caves with puzzles in them. If that's the kind of energy you put into Breath of the Wild, what you're going to get is something very underwhelming in return. If you're in it to complete the game, to seek out all the spirit orbs, do all the side quests, or, God forbid, collect all of the Korok seeds, you're going to burn out hard. There's too much to do, and reducing the experience to a checklist to be followed renders the world you're in artificial. It is best experienced when you surrender yourself to its rhythm, when you aren't thinking about how much you have left or how much you've already done. Sometimes it just feels good to scale a really tall mountain. There might not necessarily be anything waiting up there for you. There's probably a Korok, maybe a shrine if you're lucky, but that doesn't really matter, does it? It takes a lot of effort to climb in Breath of the Wild. If your stamina is low and you don't have access to Rivali's Gale, I don't use any of those abilities anymore, it is a slow and arduous process. You have to be mindful of how much stamina you have left, looking for footholds along the way to catch your breath. All the while, a simple rainstorm could halt your progress entirely. Some of these mountains feel like boss fights in and of themselves. When you reach that peak, your reward is a beautiful view. You can scan that horizon for shrines or villages, but you can also just sit there, admiring the effort it took to catch this gorgeous vista. I feel like there's very little space in the critical landscape to to appreciate moments like this. Often we're caught up in a go, go, go mindset. How much content is there? Is all that content good? Is everything you're doing worth your time? It's fun to dig into that stuff. I do it all the time. But there are also moments like this. The ones we don't talk about very much. A world can be so captivating that it can stop you in its tracks. A moment can be so powerful that it wrests the controller from your grasp, forcing you to take it all in. There are moments like this dotted all throughout my recent playthrough. Every time I booted it up, there was a new adventure to be had. No matter where I decided to go, there was something waiting for me. Maybe it was a bokoblin camp that I could approach any way I wanted. Maybe it was a huge body of water I had to find my way across. Your obstacle is nature itself. The flow of water, the chirping of bugs, the wind rippling through the grass. Playing Breath of the Wild is meditative. Until, of course, it isn't. Every man-made object is built to serve a purpose. For a weapon, that goal is to damage or kill your opponent. Many are built to last, but the weapons in Breath of the Wild are built to crumble. They serve their purpose, they do so quickly, and then they break. Shrines offer bite-sized puzzles lasting no longer than a few minutes. Each of them center around a specific idea, one you're asked to engage with before leaving it behind. This is a serious departure from previous games, where ideas like these would often be incorporated into larger dungeons. The divine beasts, the closest analog we have to traditional dungeons, are simply a collection of shrine puzzles dressed up to fit the stereotypical mold. It's safe to say a lot of people take issue with the fleeting nature of these mechanics. That your shiny new powerful weapon will break in 20 swings, or that this massive mech can be completed in 15 minutes. The nature of its design means you can never become attached to anything. You're never doing any one thing for long enough that you could. Instead, you're a wanderer, drifting from area to area. It's an interesting approach. If what you're doing at any given moment doesn't appeal to you, well, it'll be over in a matter of minutes. On the flip side, if you find something really cool, well, it'll be over in a matter of minutes. Dungeons of the past were pretty big, and depending on their complexity, you'd be in them for a while. From a certain point of view, divine beasts are simply neutered versions of a thing people used to love. All of them are cloaked in the theming of the shrines, giving them no personality of their own. Their structure is fairly open, with puzzles you can complete in any order. Those puzzles do follow a theme, but they don't necessarily connect with one another in any meaningful way. To top it all off, your reward at the end of it all is a different flavor of Ganon. If I were to judge these things as traditional dungeons, they would all be at the very bottom. Which begs the question, are these traditional dungeons? Should we be judging them by the same standards? When I look at a divine beast with no prior context, simply as mechanisms within Breath of the Wild's world, I see something really unique. A mechanical beast of legend that you explore and manipulate using your map. You move in and out of these beasts organically. There are no limits to what you're allowed to do in them. These are dungeons you are free to explore and solve as you see fit, and if you remove your expectations of what a dungeon should or should not be, I think it's much easier to appreciate that. They fit the vibe of a game where you're never in one place for too long and have the freedom to do whatever you want. I suppose freedom comes with its own limitations. Where games like Twilight Princess had phenomenal set pieces which punctuated lengthy dives into puzzle box labyrinths, Breath of the Wild lacks a lot of that bombastic energy, but makes up for it in making the moment-to-moment experience so addictive. Fighting enemies was never truly a high point in past Zeldas. They were necessary obstacles to break up the pace of an area you were exploring. You could only ever solve them one way. Breath of the Wild's combat encounters are so much more invigorating. You have a number of tools at your disposal to handle tough enemies. You can set your surroundings on fire, using the updraft to catch some airtime and rain fire on them from above. You can sneak into a camp while they're sleeping and deliver a powerful sneak strike. You can freeze a batch of them and blow them off a cliff. Even though these challenges are short, they are almost never rigid. because the tools you use to solve them are not fit for a single purpose. Past Zelda items like the hookshot were limited in their applications. Link could move himself to a faraway target or bring something closer to him. That was about it. Compare that to Magnesis, which allows Link to pick up and move metal objects. It might not sound like a lot, but this is a multifaceted ability capable of solving a number of different challenges. Thanks to a robust physics engine, the momentum created from dropping an object will carry into whatever it drops onto. This can mean solving a shrine puzzle with scales by dropping a box onto the opposite scale, launching you into the air. It can also mean using those metal objects to conduct electricity and complete a circuit, thanks to an equally robust chemistry engine. It can mean dropping that object onto an enemy's head, or using it to block an incoming projectile. Stasis can stop objects and enemies in their tracks, but it can also be used to move them. If you jump onto something before it launches, you've also created a means of traveling long distances. It can, of course, also be used as a weapon. Even comparatively simple runes, like bombs and Cryonis, have unique use cases. Cryonis can be used to cross bodies of water, but it can also be used to scale waterfalls. Bombs are useful in combat and to break blocks, but they can also be used as propulsion for minecarts and cannons. The core of the Breath of the Wild experience, and what makes it so different from what came before, is thus. You are constantly solving puzzles of all different sorts. That puzzle might not be as pronounced as a shrine. It could just be as simple as chopping down a tree and using the log as a bridge to cross a ravine. The important part is that you are constantly asking yourself, how do I want to solve this? And this is only possible because they created so many little challenges to fill out the world and make your sense of discovery all the sweeter. Weapon durability is the most controversial of these new systems. It is the most necessary evil of them all, with no obvious benefits. Your weapons will break, with no way to repair them. You are forced to go out into the world and look for new ones. It's yet another problem the world presents you with. The weapons of this age are brittle. None of them will last you very long. Even the Blade of Evil's Bane cannot be used indefinitely. This system is meant to poke and prod at restrictive mindsets, forcing players to walk a bit outside their comfort zones. When one of your most powerful weapons breaks, it almost feels as though the game is challenging you to keep going. There are numerous ways to solve this combat encounter, and you've just lost your most reliable method. What are you going to do now? Ideally, durability won't pose much of a problem to someone that already takes advantage of the numerous ways in which you can defeat enemies. I had a steady supply of weapons, in part because I had to look for creative ways to get the upper hand. Earlier on especially, with only a couple hearts, death was right around the corner if I rushed into a camp thoughtlessly. If you look at weapons like everything else you use, a tool to get through a set of problems, one you don't even necessarily need to use, durability makes a lot more sense. They're a set of temporary keys to open combat locks, in a game where locks are meant to be picked. Decisions like this are what make Breath of the Wild's pacing so immaculate. Whether you're reflecting on the beauty of the world or solving a puzzle within it, you're always doing something meaningful, and it's only so meaningful because it is fleeting. My relationship with critique has evolved in recent years. I used to view critique as a math problem. There was always a right and wrong way to do something. I simply had to identify what those answers were. This game is too easy, this character didn't work for me, this story moment's stupid. All I had to do was add up all the good and the bad, and the sum would tell me how much I liked something. The closer to perfect an experience was, the better. I remember criticizing the Blue Flame Shrine for not being equipped to deal with your potential lack of resources. If you didn't come in with arrows, you wouldn't be able to solve the puzzle. Truthfully, it wasn't actually something that bothered me very much. All I had to do was leave and go buy some arrows real quick, which I think speaks to the kind of mindset I went into the video with. I was almost looking for stuff to complain about. I think it also speaks to a larger change in philosophy I've had towards engaging with video games, that I no longer care about this little quirk. You can buy arrows in every major city. It doesn't mean it still isn't a problem, it's just not an issue that particularly bothers me. Certainly wouldn't bring it up if I were covering it these days. I want to see games for what they are, not what I wish for them to be. These days, I simply play a game and hope that it's an experience I get something out of. When I made that video in 2017, I was expecting Breath of the Wild to be a certain way. In going through all the Zelda games again, I came closer to understanding what I loved about them, right before the rug was pulled out from under me. I watched that legendary trailer alongside everyone else, the one that promised an epic story worthy of the title. It was going to be the Zelda we love, but in an open world. That isn't what we got. The story was not as epic as the trailer made it seem. The big dungeons we'd come to expect were small in number and in size. The legendary music we heard in the trailer was nowhere to be found, replaced by practically nothing at all. What I wanted was Twilight Princess in an open world. What I got was diametrically opposed to it. I enjoyed it for what it was, but there was a distinct voice in the back of my head telling me that this was not Zelda. That security and comfort it gave me as a franchise was gone in an instant, with no guarantee of it ever coming back. Its stated goals felt like a condemnation of the games I had come to love. What people celebrated about it felt like an indirect jab at the now old, outdated way of doing things. In a way, I played Breath of the Wild with the same mindset I approached all of the other Zelda games with. I did every single shrine before releasing the video, blasting through all of its content in a very short period of time. I gave myself very little time to reflect. My script writing process was extremely slapdash back then. I'd pretty much just dump all my thoughts down with very little rhyme, reason, or structure. Near the end of it all, I had to look up where the remaining shrines were. In a game about wonder, discovery, I reached a point where I was checking objectives off a list. Feels like a miracle that I was even able to enjoy it as much as I did. Even so, there was still so much I hadn't done. I didn't help build Terrytown, partly because I didn't talk to very many people. I only found a few great fairies. I barely had any bugs or materials to upgrade with. I cooked as little as I possibly could to get by and only really hit up areas that had shrines in them. Naturally, I laser focused on the nature of its content. Many of its 120 shrines were underwhelming. Combat shrines and gyro puzzles felt like they were everywhere, so you never really knew what you were going to get quality-wise. All of them looked and felt the same, which grew old fast when I was knocking them out one by one. I had assumed that because there were so many shrines, that was the reason why the dungeons weren't what I wanted them to be. If only they had reduced the amount of them, not tried to pad the number by introducing several inconsequential challenges. The divine beasts really burned me hard. I had come to expect a series of thought-provoking labyrinths. These were simply larger shrines with a gimmick that could all be figured out in no more than 20 minutes. In terms of what I traditionally saw as a dungeon, Hyrule Castle was really the only thing that gave me even a semblance of what I wanted. A huge, themed dungeon that could be traversed in any way the player desired. Earlier on, there was a sense of childlike wonder. I wandered into a cold area and died. Did the same in Gerudo Desert. I was spooked the first time a guardian set its sights on me, partly because the opening hours were the time in which I was the most fragile and afraid. I watched a giant dragon fly out of the Zonai ruins and rise into the sky. In many ways, it was an experience I could not get anywhere else. The further I got, the more comfortable with it I became. It started to lose that magic. I had more than enough weapons to deal with any combat encounter. I had more than enough hearts to survive any situation. There weren't many more surprises waiting for me. I discovered how disappointing the dungeons were and how much the story didn't seem to matter all that much. It was a playthrough that felt like it got worse the longer it went on. This is when I started getting annoyed by the smallest things. The fact that the Forgotten Temple, a place I discovered at the bottom of a ravine, one that gave me a heart attack upon walking in, didn't really lead to anything. The idea that you could bypass some puzzles by using fire arrows or other tools really bothered me, since I had this expectation that all potential solutions should be balanced in some way. Shrines began to aggravate me as they were not allowed to build on each other at all. meaning the vast majority of them were destined to be short and simple. There's a point at which I stopped fighting enemies entirely, as what I would receive in return was less than I would end up spending. I'd do the same for mini-bosses like the Talus or Hinox. These fights were really exciting earlier on, where a single hit could end my life. Later, though, they became very predictable, and their rewards were not very useful. I had a stockpile of monster parts and materials which contributed to fuck all. And the thing is, to a certain extent, these things actually do still bother me. I like the divine beasts more than I used to, but I'd be lying if I said I was just chomping at the bit to do them. Test of Strength shrines are instantly deflating. Almost all of the side quests feel like filler with a few notable exceptions. Areas like Lurelin Village simply don't have a lot going on in them. Hell, some areas don't really have a lot going on. Breath of the Wild can feel pretty aimless. It does not give you direction. You have to give it to yourself. As a 19-year-old college student following a degree I wasn't even sure I wanted in the first place, giving myself direction just wasn't going to happen. And so I played this radical departure from the series formula and was disappointed when I found out that it was a radical departure from the series formula. Go figure. Japanese life is marked by the presence of Buddhism and Shintoism. This does not necessarily mean Japanese people are overtly religious, the same way that not all Americans are Christian. It simply means that their influence is ingrained in Japanese culture. Buddhist philosophy is one focused on self-betterment. You achieve nirvana by recognizing the suffering inherent to human life, and working to cleanse yourself of its influence. This can be done by meditating or doing good deeds. This contributes to Eastern views of life and time as an eternal cycle in which humanity is fated to enter periods of prosperity, decline, and rebirth. Shinto beliefs center around nature and its awe. Various fixtures of nature which are awe-inspiring, such as the sun and the moon, a forest, or a stream, are named kami. Appreciation for the kami is central to Shinto beliefs, from which springs an overwhelming respect for nature. From a certain point of view, Link is on his own spiritual journey across Hyrule. He visits Sheikah shrines inspired by Buddhist monks who would meditate beyond death. These shrines offer puzzles to be solved with one's wisdom, and the reward is to grow more resilient via spirit orbs, which can be exchanged for more health or stamina. Link also discovers Koroks in the wild, spirits of the forest reminiscent of the Shinto kami. These are more numerous, but also more hidden. To find them, one must examine their surroundings more closely. Whether it be overturning a rock or making an offering to a shrine, Koroks are all about taking interest in the wonders of nature. Shigeru Miyamoto created Zelda to emulate his childhood experiences exploring the wonders of nature. It was a reward in and of itself to bask in its beauty. And this is exactly why I love Breath of the Wild. This is why it's still Zelda, despite everything it ostensibly left behind. I think we often get wrapped up in our own perceptions of something. They are our only reliable metric, after all. Our feelings toward art are subjective by nature. There's no way to objectively measure how good or bad a piece is, which means that how we end up defining the spirit of something is based on what we view that spirit to be. For some, Breath of the Wild has more of the Zelda spirit than any other game in the franchise. For others, it has almost none of the Zelda spirit. The solution to bringing back that lost spirit, for many, is to bring back what worked before. Turn Zelda back into what it once was, with all the bells and whistles this new format provides. In this case, I can't help but feel like that would be a regression. Breath of the Wild's fundamentals are the way they are for a reason. Its story is structured to be minimalistic and open-ended in order for it to work within a truly free format. That's why the dungeons are the way they are. That's why the shrines are the way they are. That's why the reward structure is the way that it is. The pillars it erected are not flawless by any stretch, but I also don't know if they can be replaced. Will we ever see a Zelda game again where you collect dungeon items and use them to open up new areas? Probably not, because that simply wouldn't work in an open world. Will we ever see a Zelda game again with a much more involved story? Probably not, because that simply wouldn't work when the player needs to have the freedom to do whatever they want. Will we ever see a Zelda game again with dungeons based around small keys that are more about navigation? Probably not, because that simply wouldn't work in a game that attempts to eliminate as many restrictive elements as possible. If we aren't careful, we risk taking the franchise back to its same problems. In my opinion, the only reason we think that these things need to change is that we prefer the old way and want it back. I mean, seriously, think about this for a second. What is inherently wrong with the idea of a world that doesn't reveal everything about itself? What is inherently wrong with a minimalist soundtrack? What is inherently wrong with dungeons that fit the uniform aesthetic of the tribe who made them? If the answer is any variation of, because that's not how it used to be, well, are we really willing to let Zelda change? Change is inevitable, and the sad reality is, it is not guaranteed to be liked by everyone. The sooner we are able to accept that, the sooner we are able to move on. Which doesn't mean we can't express our disappointment with how things have changed, but in wishing for a franchise to bend to our desires, are we not forsaking its own desires? This is our new reality. Aonuma has expressed that Zelda will continue to be like this. It's not gonna change, especially if Tears of the Kingdom is anything to go by. Even if you're not a fan of these new games, those older titles aren't going anywhere. Having gone through them all again this year, they have not lost one bit of their magic. Not only that, games will come around that emulate this style and do something with it that Zelda never could. We've seen this in Bug Fables following up on Paper Mario. We're seeing it in Sea of Stars following up on Chrono Trigger. If it doesn't already exist, we will see it with classic 3D Zelda. My message is thus. Feel disappointed, feel frustrated, feel angry. Accept those emotions, let them pass through you, and simply let go. All things change. All things break. Nothing can stop that. Expectations can be poisonous. They are a rabbit hole of exponentially increasing desire. The longer something takes to create, the more expectations will build until it spirals into something nobody has any control over. We become so caught up in how something might meet or exceed our expectations that we begin to lose what that creation is, or what it's trying to do. Art is often an exchange between creator and connoisseur. While it is perfectly acceptable for artists not to share their creations with anyone, they often do so anyway. The first time is always quaint. Bewilderment, fascination, adoration. The artist has gained a patron, one who eagerly awaits new creations. As this relationship develops, a pressure begins to build. There's a desire within the artist to keep improving their skills, to make pieces that transcend what they've previously made. As the artist seeks growth, so too does the patron. Their obsession with the work growing, their desire to feel that same sense of wonder again, building. The need to outdo the previous work spirals out of control. The artist takes longer to make something. They stress about the smallest details. They begin to wonder how they even made it this far to begin with. What is their artistic voice again? What is their style? Are they making anything truly worthwhile? The connoisseur grows more and more impatient, and with that impatience comes a more hypercritical mindset. They study every little blemish, eager to inform them that this piece is not as spectacular as the last, as their expectations grow into something no one could possibly meet. Maybe the artist isn't even interested in meeting those expectations anymore. Maybe they want to do something different. Maybe they're at odds with what they want to achieve, but the patron doesn't care. They want what they want. They want the peace they dreamed up in their head, and if they don't get it, they're going to be very disappointed. This cycle continues and continues and continues until something finally snaps. Tears of the Kingdom is iterative, in a very literal sense of the word. What the Zelda team wanted to do was find a way to recapture Breath of the Wild's magic. They wanted to emulate the erasure of their memories, to somehow replicate their first time playing Breath of the Wild. A tough ask. How then do you recycle Hyrule? To take what it was in Breath of the Wild and repurpose it for what Tears of the Kingdom hopes to accomplish. You change the way players interact with it. All of the old abilities are gone, and in their place, a set of new abilities that require you to view progression in a fundamentally different way. Breath of the Wild's tools were multi-purpose, but they clearly had conceptual limits. Even though you could do so many things with Magnesis, its core function could only interact with metal objects. You really had to stretch your brain to make truly imaginative use of these powers. Tears of the Kingdom leans into that imagination. You can now move any object, regardless of its properties, and fuse said object to another object. You can build your own bridges and ladders out of whatever happens to be lying around. The introduction of objects that can shoot fire or lasers means you can build death traps for combat. The introduction of wheels and wings means you can build cars and planes. Combining both will net you a weapon of mass destruction. In Breath of the Wild, moving from place to place had a certain charm to it. You weren't yet familiar with the world, so each step you took was a new discovery. If you go into Tears of the Kingdom having played Breath of the Wild first, that sense of geographical discovery is mostly absent. Therefore, the act of travel itself had to be made more interesting. The ways in which you can move about the world are truly limitless. You could make a car, a bike, a mech, a plane, a hover bike, a hovercraft, a monster truck, a rocket, a catapult. There was a point in time where being given a literal motorcycle was perhaps the craziest thing the Zelda team had ever done. That time has passed. Your limit is simply your own creativity. And that was one of the most exciting revelations I had stepping into Hyrule again. You take the same approach you took in Breath of the Wild, solving various types of puzzles, but this time your toolbox has quadrupled in size. Ultra Hand might be the king of this versatility, but the other abilities serve the same function. Fuse lets you attach any object to your blade, shield, or bow. This removes any of the remaining limiters on Breath of the Wild's combat. You can attach bombs to your shield, which will propel you into the air after performing a shield jump, while also blowing up anyone in the radius of that shield jump. Attaching objects with elemental properties to your weapons will turn them into makeshift wands. Attaching a spring to your shield will let you auto-parry attacks, and also give you a big boost off of a shield jump. I am simply too weak to list all of the ways in which these fused objects interact both inside and outside of combat. One of the coolest aspects of Tears of the Kingdom was discovering just how many different interactions there were. I was exchanging information with friends and watching Twitter clips, which taught me so many things I didn't know before. Previous objects I wrote off as useless would almost always have some hidden function you could unlock via the fuse ability. Giving almost every item a hidden function like this also meant that I was incredibly cognizant of the items I was picking up. In addition to the items enemies would drop in the original game, every enemy now has a special set of materials which have attack power when fused to a weapon, meaning that you get to make your own powerful weapons out of what you find during your adventure. These two abilities add more on their own than all 4 abilities in Breath of the Wild combined, and there are still 2 more. Recall has the same effect as stasis, letting you stop objects in their tracks, but it has the additional effect of making them reverse their trajectory. You do lose out on the ability to move objects long distances during the stasis time stop, but you gain the ability to create makeshift elevators in pretty much the same way with a far greater degree of control. Bombs are now their own item, which are plentiful in caves and the depths. Thanks to the fuse ability, you can even still make the old elemental arrow types that are now absent. Cryonis has been replaced by Ascend, which allows you to move through any ceiling, making cave exploration much less clunky while also giving you an alternative to mountain climbing. Even though Cryonis is gone, you can still throw objects with ice properties into bodies of water to create ice platforms, which in essence means that its utility still exists. I'd even say it's more useful than Cryonis ever was, since you're able to use these blocks of ice with your other abilities to create something new. That block of ice could be fused to your shield to give you less friction when shield surfing. You could attach a fan to it with Ultra Hand to create a makeshift boat. These abilities simply fit the mold of what open-air Zelda is trying to be so much better than the runes in Breath of the Wild, which were abilities I already loved and thought were perfect at the time. Instead of chopping down a tree conveniently placed next to a ravine and using it as a makeshift bridge, you can now cut down several of those trees, attach them, and create your own bridge that is also a ladder. Then, you could turn that creation into a raft to cross a river, or turn it into a flying machine to soar the skies. Shrines are constructed almost identically in concept, but the freedom of your core abilities means that they all have multiple solutions baked in. Maybe it would be more accurate to say that they don't all have an intended solution, and I think that was the point. If you move an object into the air with Ultra Hand, let it fall, and then use Recall on it, you've created a makeshift elevator. The time stop effect of Recall will also allow you to use Ascend for similar shenanigans. You aren't allowed to bring your Zonai devices out while inside a shrine, but if you happen to have a rocket already attached to your shield, you get free height, which can be used to break many of the puzzles. Breath of the Wild had stuff like this, but much of it was done with speedrunning exploits like wind bombing, which were pretty difficult tricks to perform. Here, that step is removed entirely, made much more accessible and central to your puzzle solving. You are encouraged to cheat, since a correct solution doesn't necessarily exist. You are asked to simply find your solution and find satisfaction in that discovery. For this to work, these cheats are never explained. You won't really know that bombs can activate orange switches until you try it out or learn from someone else. Even if you know that you can do this, you might still want to solve it a different way. As I mentioned in my Breath of the Wild video, these games are all about your moment-to-moment decision-making and the enjoyment derived therein. Should you decide cheating isn't fun, it's very possible to avoid doing it. I, for one, like having fun, so I would cheat at every single opportunity. It was incredible. I'd say that more often than not, there are several different ways to solve any given shrine. Their design ethos feels much stronger overall. There may be more blessing shrines, but that's also because more of them have puzzles in the overworld. It might be that you have to find the shrine in a cave, or move a crystal, or fight a boss. Tests of strength are gone, and in their place, a set of challenges modeled after Eventide Island and the Master Sword challenges. Your abilities are tailor-made for these, as there are so many different ways you can defeat all of the enemies. It doesn't usually feel like there are filler shrines, despite there being more of them. Even if sometimes the challenges you complete are similar, I appreciate that you're almost always doing something different. Koroks see a similar glow-up, with new puzzles to solve that revolve around the physics system to an even greater degree. A greater understanding of the system is occasionally necessary when building. While you're creating a vehicle, you need to keep in mind how it would operate on land or in the air. If your creation has too much weight on one side, it will tip over. If your object is too heavy, you won't be able to lift it off of the ground. This adds an extra spice to your creativity, and Nintendo have even cleverly crafted puzzles which require mastery of this knowledge. One of the new Korok puzzles requires that you pull a cork out of a plug. This can be as simple as attaching a rock and throwing it off of a cliff, but one of them in particular was situated in such a way where it was difficult to figure out what I had to do, until I realized I can just tow it. So I made a giant towing device and pulled the cork out. In retrospect, I probably could have just attached a rocket to it and called it a day, but that doesn't diminish the eureka moment I had solving this puzzle. It's a paradigm shift. Nothing is correct and nothing is wrong. A logical extension of the way in which players naturally solved the original. Aonuma and Fujibayashi were hoping that this creativity would be enough of a twist that this return trip to Hyrule would be meaningful.
We knew we were creating a world that was going to be filled with many different objects, tools, and items for people to interact with. And we knew we wanted to have this function in the game where you could combine things, put things together. Through interacting with all of the things we were filling the world with, we wanted people to have this feeling along the lines of, oh, I was able to do this? But wait, what would happen if I tried this? We wanted to kind of put players' imaginations to work, to get you thinking proactively from your own end about what might be possible. We're hoping that people will have that creative thinking process over and over again as they play through the game, and maybe even that they will carry that kind of thinking, that creativity and expanded imagination, into their real lives.
They went as far as to say that their confidence in this vision was boosted by seeing the videos players would share on social media, where they pulled off crazy stunts the developers never could have envisioned. I think we all took great pleasure in watching videos like that, learning something about the game that we didn't know before. And Tears of the Kingdom thrives on that addictive energy. I might not always make creative use out of Ultra Hand. I have my moments. I made some wacky stuff in my time with the game. But I know that my will to enact my wilder dreams is not as strong as those who built elaborate death traps to torture Koroks. People who would spend hours putting together a realistic convertible or a Looney Tunes food trap. I've spent a concerning amount of time watching videos like this, seeing just how far Tears of the Kingdom systems can be pushed, and that's its own kind of satisfaction. It's not time you or I put directly into the game per se, yet it has power over your thoughts. I would say, to Aonuma's comment about wishing players could take that kind of creativity into their own life, to even the smallest extent, I believe they were successful. Imagine the generation growing up with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Some of these players might pursue engineering, they might develop a love for creation. I recommended this game to my little cousins because I thought it would be gourmet food for their curious, developing minds. It's an inspirational vision, one born of the exchange between those who play and those who create. A chance for both parties to learn more about the other and to grow. The same Hyrule is, of course, not the same Hyrule. That would be reductive. A great deal of time has passed, and with it, the world has seen myriad changes. No matter where you end up, there is something new to experience. Death mountains of magma pools have disappeared, and in their place, several mining operations in the caves have sprung forth. You cannot enter this area with the same preparations you had for Breath of the Wild. Being set ablaze isn't much of a worry until you set foot in the caves, which are hotter than the surface. The Gerudo Desert is obscured by a sandstorm, with undead monstrosities lying in wait. Your concern is no longer the sweltering heat of the sun, nor the chilling cold of the moon. It is the fear of what might lie beyond the sands. The ringed monuments that fell onto Kakariko Village lend it an air of mystery, with many scholars visiting the settlement to learn more about where these structures came from. No matter where you decide to go, there is a twist on your expectations. It is a remix of what we saw in Breath of the Wild. It is possible to play Tears of the Kingdom without playing its predecessor, and derive enjoyment from it. Of that much, I am relatively certain. I cannot test this hypothesis, but the all-knowing sector of my brain knows this to be true. However, in many ways, I feel like the full experience can only be achieved by those who are familiar with the original. Every single area of note has something in it meant to play off of players' expectations. it might not necessarily be a subversion. When you visit Tarrytown, it is largely to catch up with its citizens and see what they're up to. Hudson has a daughter. It's very cute. There are more people, more houses. It's gratifying to watch Hudson bond with his daughter before she's taken to Gerudo Town per their custom, especially because you know that you're responsible for Tarrytown's existence in the first place. This is more or less what players expected to return to. The Lost Woods, meanwhile, have been corrupted by Ganondorf's influence. You cannot enter it via the means you used in Breath of the Wild. It is an impenetrable fortress of poison, one you have to ascend up to through the depths below. You're greeted by Koroks that have seemingly been robbed of their sentience as they stare into the void for what seems like an eternity. Thoughtless, motionless. This location has lost its playful energy, replaced by an ominous miasma. This is another way in which the devs have acknowledged that their players know this world that they've created. Some of them know it intimately, and so they seem to have delighted in remixing this Hyrule to play with those expectations. One of the first things I did was wander off to Gerudo Desert. I did not expect to encounter Gibdo there, nor did I expect to have to fight them in an environment that blinded me. This was quite an unnerving experience, as I still only had a few hearts, which proved to be my undoing at several points. Trying to get above the sandstorm to feel my way through it was extremely satisfying. As you wander this remixed Hyrule, you'll be asking yourself a bunch of new questions. I wonder what's waiting for me on top of the dueling peaks. I wonder where the great fairies have run off to. I wonder what'll happen at Eventide Island. Eventually, I found myself eager to visit all of the locations I'd become so familiar with in my many hours with Breath of the Wild, and very rarely was I disappointed with what I ended up finding. It is pretty impressive to be able to pick a spot on the map, go there, and find something different. There's a Gleeok chilling on the bridge to Lake Hylia. There's also one in the Colosseum, just in case you were too comfortable fighting Lynels. Of course, maybe you want to go see what's going on at the Great Plateau, now that it isn't your starting area. I think caves and side adventures are a big reason this never grows stale. Caves offer an alternative to shrines that focus more on spelunking. It's where you'll find Horriblins, Like-Likes, and other nasties. Shrines are great, but it is nice to have an equivalent that isn't so exclusively focused on puzzle solving, and adds a lot of physical dimension to most areas. Some of these cave networks lead you to underground ruins with unique rewards. One of them, the Underground Royal Passage, is built into the lore. It was an ancient tunnel system the royal family would use to escape the castle when disasters struck. And it is the longest cave in the game. It stretches from where Hyrule Castle used to be all the way to Lookout Landing, and holds a full set of armor. It didn't matter where I was. Finding a cave opening filled me with excitement every single time, even if sometimes what awaited me was a relatively simple distraction. Tears of the Kingdom has a ROM hack-esque energy, which is not meant to be taken as a dig. I couldn't rely on the knowledge I had accumulated about Breath of the Wild. I couldn't go to my usual spot and find the climbing gear or the barbarian set. Rediscovering them was always a joy, and I think it's really cool that it's also given previously Amiibo exclusive gear a more natural place within the world. I didn't use any of Breath of the Wild's Amiibo gear, so I got to delight in glee when I found the Big Goron sword for the first time. There are new armor sets mixed in, which can bypass rain while climbing, negate fall damage, increase air traction, and so much more. They're usually tied to beefy side objectives as well, making them fairly worthwhile rewards. You have much more of a reason this time to visit all of the stables when your reward is the frog suit. There's a Yiga set you can obtain which lets you disguise yourself as one of them, become a Blade Master, enter their hideout, and learn their exclusive Earthshaker move. It kinda sucks, but also, it's really cool. Adding more stuff like this just makes any given playthrough more adaptable to challenge runs, and I think there was an intentionality to that. I don't think it's merely a coincidence that the paraglider is no longer a mandatory item. Zelda has always had challenge run potential. The fabled 3-heart run was the ultimate test of skill, and Breath of the Wild allowed for many more challenges like this. Tears of the Kingdom goes even further, giving everyone full control over how difficult they want their playthrough to be. Ultimately, this is a Hyrule you are likely very familiar with, but it preys on that familiarity. It will twist your expectations at every turn, and the tools you use to explore offer a completely different experience to Breath of the Wild. Even though it wasn't what I personally wanted, I'm glad they decided to use the same map. It gave me an experience I never would have gotten from Zelda otherwise. I'm glad I was able to set aside my expectations and accept Tears of the Kingdom for what it ended up being. Minecraft is a game that used to have no ending. You would spawn into a new world, chop down some trees, find shelter, and dig down in search of diamonds. The loop was simple. The easy materials would only net you brittle tools, so you'd have to search underground for rare minerals to upgrade those tools. It was a randomly generated world, which meant it was more about your search for those materials than it was soaking in your environment. Though, you could still do that if you wanted. Clearly, the act of finding these materials was strong enough to keep players moving through these dark corridors. Minecraft has since seen many updates, most of which I have no familiarity with. I am what you would call a Minecraft boomer. I had one of the earliest iterations of the game's beta, and I played it all the time. All I would do is build houses and search for diamonds, and somehow, this was enough for me. When I boot up Minecraft these days, my senses are assaulted. All of this new stuff confuses me. I still don't know what many of these things are. When my little cousins beg me to play with them, I feel like they have transcended my once intimate knowledge of what the game even is. What I prefer to still do is generate a world and search for precious diamonds. In Tears of the Kingdom, I really enjoy searching for diamonds. 2 new areas have been added to the old map, one in the sky and one down below. Your reason for visiting these biomes is functionally the same, but the ways in which they interact with the regular map keep them from growing stale. I'll admit, in some ways the sky feels like a bit of a letdown. While I try not to go into games with too many preconceived notions, a great deal of the game's marketing centered around the Sky Islands, so I was expecting more from them than we ultimately got. There's 1 chain of islands per major area, and too many of them revolve around a variation on the Shrine Crystal puzzle. It was fun to get these to their destinations, but they're all pretty similar in layout. You always know what you're going to get. It's simply down to how creative you'll be while solving it. No matter how rote, these Sky Islands almost always have something useful on them to make the journey feel worthwhile. Simply being so high up gives you a much broader view of the surface. It's much easier to access landmarks of interest or scout out nearby shrines. Almost every island has a hidden chest on it, which will contain a treasure map that leads to the depths. You'll be able to pick up items that will prepare you for your eventual trek down there. Fairies for security, and Sundelions to combat the gloom. You spend a lot of time above ground building up your arsenal. You'll get powerful Zonai weaponry in the sky, plus a ton of powerful cooking materials. You'll find armor pieces on the surface, which can be upgraded at the Great Fairies. All of this to prepare for the depths. In some ways, it shares some weaknesses with the sky. Many of its locations are copy-pasted structures, with each of them giving you more or less the same experience. However, it has a bit of a twist. It is pitch black. You need to light your way through the darkness, gradually painting its picture. In the meantime, though, you're left with a seemingly endless void. A dark world. Gloom is everywhere, ready to reduce your maximum health. Enemies are infused with gloom, meaning every hit they land on you will also reduce your max HP. All of the same dangers of the surface await you, in an area where you can't see 5 feet in front of you and can't rely on temporary hearts like you could in Breath of the Wild. I have spent hours wandering down here. I have spent so much time down here that I would lose the time of day. Even though there aren't many unique landmarks, its relationship to the surface is strong. Exploring requires that you cross-reference your depths map with your surface map. Light roots, which light up huge swaths of the underground, correspond directly with shrine locations on the surface. The implication here is that the light roots are what birthed these shrines. Not only that, there is an inverse relationship with the surface terrain. Mountainous areas of the surface become deep valleys in the depths, while the valleys of the surface become mountains in the depths. Areas with water on the surface become impassable walls in the depths. The various abandoned mining operations you find are directly below surface settlements. There are gigantic, terrifying statues directly below all of the surface goddess statues. I felt like a cartographer down here, planning my next route carefully, studying the surface to figure out what awaited me in the darkness. Bombs and muddle buds were useful to pick up along the way, and the treasure chests with items referencing past Zelda games were cute, but the real draw for me was collecting Zonite. Zonite is primarily used to increase your maximum Zonai gauge. This is a gauge that's depleted when you use Zonai devices, including ones you create yourself. The more Zonai devices you attach to something, the faster it will deplete your gauge. It takes a lot of Zonite to upgrade this gauge, so you'll be down here for a very long time looking for ore. Luckily, almost everything you do down here gives you Zonite as a reward, meaning you're pretty much always collecting a ton of it. If you're someone who wants to mess around with crazy contraptions, collecting Zonite is super rewarding. Exploring in the depths scratches an altogether different itch than the above ground. Here, it's all about filling in the darkness, fighting tough enemies, collecting materials, and chiefly, survival. Uncovering the numerous connections between the surface and the depths was always satisfying. You don't really think about it until you're down there, but there are a lot of notable landmarks on the surface, all of which have interesting counterparts in the depths. These two areas serve as a yin and yang. The depths is coded as Ganondorf's territory. This is where he spends the majority of the adventure, spreading his gloom across the land as it seeps out into the surface. Not only are all of his minions here in their strongest form, the Yiga are here as well, on a quest to build the ultimate weapon for the Demon King. It takes a lot of courage to explore down here. It feels like he knows when you've set foot in his domain. His control over it is overwhelming. The sky is thematically opposed to this darkness. Exploration here is much more relaxing. Enemies are scarce, far from Ganondorf's clutches. You'll fight Zonai constructs meant to keep invaders at bay, but even these robots are few and far between. You'll spend most of your time here in peace, drifting from island to island, admiring the stunning view. This is the domain of the heavenly Zonai, the domain of the first king of Hyrule. It is the embodiment of freedom. Like Ganondorf below, you get the sense that Rauru is watching over you, except his presence lifts a weight from your shoulders. This light is at risk. The depths serve as a warning. It is already an inversion of the surface world. It represents what that world will become should Ganondorf take the throne. His is a domain of power and greed. He will strip Hyrule of its resources, poison the earth, and corrupt its people. One day, his ambition will grow so great as to intrude upon the domain of the gods, to rip Rauru's creations from the sky and crush them beneath his feet. Meanwhile, here I am, happily searching for diamonds. There were days where this was all I did. I could see someone easily growing bored of this place. This is basically the only thing you can do down here. Honestly, part of me wonders why I find so much pleasure in it. I read an interesting quote from Fujibayashi about the approach they took to designing environments.
It's not a game, but I found a book about the theory behind creating scary haunted houses to be very interesting. It included the specific techniques used to influence the thoughts and actions of the participants. For games, this would be the players, and cause them to feel scared or excited. I was surprised because those techniques were really similar to how we create Zelda games. Tears of the Kingdom includes the depths, where the players feel the excitement as they explore an unknown space, as well as the sky, where players can enjoy pleasant gliding, exhilarating action, and beautiful views. This is not the same as surprising people in a haunted house, but the experiences are created using similar methodology. I would love for players to try out these experiences in the depths and the sky.
Once I saw a huge shadow envelop the ground beneath me. I looked into the sky and saw a dimly lit thing flying around. It was enormous. I had scarcely seen anything that big. I actually felt my heart skip a beat. It turned out to just be Colgera hanging out after I defeated him in the Wind Temple. It scared the living shit out of me. I will never forget that moment. I will never forget the first time I dropped into the depths. It was the hole below Hyrule Castle, because of course I wanted to see what was down there. Who wouldn't? It also made my heart skip a beat, as I fell for a very, very long time. I wandered into a crevice and got destroyed by a pack of Horriblins. It was awesome. It's about the feeling that these moments instilled in me. One might look at these areas and determine there's nothing of substance to do. I would counter by saying that there's a veritable goldmine of things to feel. In retrospect, this is probably the reason I love Twilight Princess so much, why I love spending time in Super Mario Sunshine's Isle Delfino, and why I would spend hours playing Minecraft. It was never about the diamonds. It was never about the Zonite. It was about striking the fear of the unknown into me. One of my favorite moments in Tears of the Kingdom was discovering the Zonai Construct Factory. The thundercloud formation above the Zonai ruins was one of the first places I wanted to explore. It was so big, I knew there had to be something special hidden away in there. I tried a few times to brave the storm, flying around with no visibility, feeling my way through it all. I wasn't making much discernible progress until I suddenly fell into a hole and was greeted by a huge door reminiscent of the one I opened in the Temple of Time. It had a steep health requirement that I wasn't able to pass. I would have to return later. For the rest of my playthrough, I thought about this door. What was behind it? Why did it require so many hearts? Would this lead me to fixing my Master Sword? I couldn't stop wondering. Once I had a sufficient amount of hearts, I teleported back, opened the door, and discovered the Zonai Construct Ruins, a hidden dungeon. This was one of the biggest things I wanted from open-air Zelda. Discoverable dungeons. Except this is the only one in the game, it's built like all the other ones, and you'll also be pointed straight to it if you progress the main quest. If Tears of the Kingdom had one major pain point for me, it would probably be how restrictive it can sometimes feel. While so many of its elements are the next logical step from Breath of the Wild, this one jarringly feels like a sidestep. The dungeons take after the divine beasts. You enter them with their respective sage, activate the 5 terminals, and fight the boss. While Tears of the Kingdom certainly borrows a lot from Breath of the Wild structure, this is one of the few areas in which I feel it returns out of sheer obligation. Sure, they all have unique theming now. Unique boss fights, that's all well and good. Colgera's theme blew my socks off. I am listening to it as I write this. I am by no means saying I dislike them. They have incredible music, inspired visual design, and more solid build-up sections with their sages. What I am saying, though, is that they only technically qualify as an upgrade to a divine beast. Even then, they lack their novelty as an idea, and need to lean on the game's more creative puzzle design. Granted, some of these puzzles are great. The one where you have to make an icicle fishing rod in the Wind Temple is brilliant. And the way I solved it was to somehow wedge myself through the hole because I am a goblin. I love being able to climb them, as it adds a different dimension to how you need to progress through them. The Lightning Temple benefits from this a lot, as you have to climb up to higher levels and sometimes even ascend through to hidden rooms. I had a decent amount of fun breaking my way through these, but they still feel too restrictive in their approach. In making a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, I feel like the only way forward is to push its ideas to their logical extremes, and in many ways it does that. Your new powers emphasize the freedom to create, as do the puzzles you solve with those powers. You're given expansive new spaces to explore with these creations, and despite it following the same shrine and Korok structure, it doesn't register to me as simply more Breath of the Wild. In spirit, yes. In practice, not necessarily. Looking back, the weirdest parts of Breath of the Wild were the lead-ups to the Divine Beasts. Almost all of them felt the same, were short enough as to not even register, and always felt like forced formalities. I remember wandering around that world and being a bit disappointed that I couldn't simply rock up to the beast myself and start exploring it. Tears of the Kingdom felt like the opportunity to let go of this, but it's doubled down instead. The water temple sits in the sky at the top of a huge string of islands. Unlike the Divine Beasts, nothing is stopping the player from reaching these dungeons, barring the Lightning Temple. You can drop in, explore, solve all of the puzzles, but if you don't have the Sage with you, you can't actually activate any of the terminals you open. I actually ended up opening the Lightning Temple far before I was supposed to, solving the Triforce Light puzzle behind Gerudo Town. I was left with this puzzling monument that I couldn't interact with no matter how hard I tried. I had basically done this for no reason, since Riju was the only person capable of interacting with this. Unfortunately, I think the team decided they wanted to make the sages more directly involved with Link and build up to a proper climax. There's an event in Hyrule Castle you can only trigger once you've done their 4 dungeons, and they play a more prominent role during the final boss encounter. The inclusion of an area like Lookout Landing as a base of operations contributes to this as well, as you return here far more frequently to reconvene with Purah. I don't know if this works to the strengths of open-air Zelda. These games are quite light on pre-established stories. They instead focus on giving players the tools they need to create their own stories, with the characters serving as background elements. It feels like a bit of a fool's errand to give them more focus because they are always going to be such a minuscule part of your adventure, at least within the framework of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's approach to open-air Zelda. I think having the sages pal around with you does more for them than any of their cutscenes do. I don't think it's impossible for open-air Zelda to juggle some of the strengths of linear storytelling, but I certainly don't think Breath of the Wild was ever built to do so. Its strengths were always in the quieter moments. I loved learning more about Hyrule and Tears of the Kingdom, soaking up the lore of the Zonai, learning about the Gerudo heroines, solving the riddles of the Typhlo ruins. This is what I found most interesting about the dungeons, that they're ancient landmarks associated with various legends. The Stormwind Arc, Gorondia, the Waterworks, I think they would have fit in more naturally if they instead took after the design ethos of Hyrule Castle. Strangely, there aren't any Hyrule Castle equivalents in Tears of the Kingdom. I suppose the depths and cave systems fulfill a similar function, but it is a shame not to have these ancient temples fill that role. Perhaps housing little bits of lore, armor pieces, or other goodies. I don't know what the Zelda team is thinking. Maybe they enjoy making dungeons that progress a main story. Looking in from the outside, it feels to me like they're a bit afraid to step too far outside that mold. They want to give players a path that they can follow if making their own path is too difficult. In doing so, however, I think they begin to undermine the strengths of open-air Zelda as a concept. People are naturally going to gravitate towards what they're interested in. A giant cyclone in the sky will be of interest to a lot of people, I guarantee it. I don't think there was a need to force players to meet Tulin before doing this. Despite placing players onto a path, they don't actually need to follow it. I did the cool lead up to the Stormwind Arc, but I could have made a flying machine and bypassed most of it. After all, I accidentally flew into the Water Temple. There are shrines on these paths too, natural points of interest for those exploring the skies. It feels a bit cruel to have them climb all the way to the top and then deny them access to the really cool bit. It's all the more puzzling to me because they haven't actually changed anything about how you finish the game. You can still immediately run to Ganondorf. You don't actually know where he is this time, but once you do figure it out, you can fight him whenever you want. It confuses me that the dungeons cannot also be this way, and that they are the only element that is this restrictive. Tears of the Kingdom's weakest moments come from the fact that it is too similar to Breath of the Wild. Even though I have a fairly solid grasp on them, its controls are still too arcane in nature. Occasionally, even I'll get a little confused as to which button I need to press in combination with another button. I've had my fair share of menu rabbit holes where I scrolled through my ridiculously huge inventory in search of a specific item. This annoyance hits a critical mass when trying to call upon your sages, as you need to physically walk up to them to activate their abilities. I think this was done because the Switch controller is already overstuffed with commands, and I don't even know how they would have fit 5 more shortcuts onto it. So we end up in a situation where you sometimes need to hunt down your companions to use their powers. Did you know that to put your Hylian hood down, you have to talk to an NPC in Hateno Village? I have no clue why this isn't simply a menu option. I don't know why we can't just select entire gear sets instead of always needing to individually equip every piece of gear. I don't know why Great Fairies still require that you upgrade each piece of armor individually. Even Sonic Frontiers solved that problem. Although there is now a recipe book, you still have to make each dish individually. I also think we have graduated beyond having to enter a shrine to receive a blessing. The one blessing shrine that twists your expectations and forces you to actually solve a puzzle was cool and all, but it did not justify me having to walk into a room, wait for it to load, receive my spirit orb, leave, and wait for it to load again 50 times over. We probably did not need to be shown the same cutscene of the imprisoning war at the end of every dungeon either. It's basically a cliche in and of itself to say that something isn't perfect. I mean, yeah, of course it isn't. Nothing is. Perfection shouldn't even be an ideal to strive toward anyway. It is a meaningless parameter that everyone will define differently. This is simply a list of things that kind of annoy me. I don't think they play to the strengths of this format, but I have hope the Zelda team will be able to find creative ways to solve these problems like they always have. They've earned my benefit of the doubt. They've given me so much already, I feel like I owe them that much. I am not at all surprised that people are not fond of Tears of the Kingdom's storytelling. If you weren't a fan of it in Breath of the Wild, this isn't going to suddenly change your mind. People obviously want something from Zelda that the devs are outspoken about no longer providing. Honestly, I don't even know if what people want was ever in Zelda to begin with. People crave continuity. Aonuma came out and said that all of the Sheikah tech mysteriously disappeared when Calamity Ganon was sealed. It had caused a huge uproar. Clearly, the Zelda team have given up crafting a coherent continuity, something they definitely cared about doing before. Plus, as lame as this response is, it's not like it doesn't make sense. It's just a tad unsatisfying and goes against what someone wanted them to do. The fact of the matter is, even if this is a direct sequel, the team still want the creative license to do whatever they wish with it. That clearly meant that they wanted Zonai tech to be at the forefront, and for Sheikah tech to be absent. I'm not even really sure what this would have done for the game. Had there been some NPC placed there to be like, oh yeah, the Sheikah tech disappeared suddenly, how odd. Because the overwhelming sentiment would be, why did they disappear then? And those questions would keep getting asked until there's a thorough explanation. But like, who cares? I certainly don't. This is the same franchise where Ocarina of Time is supposed to be the imprisoning war, and Twilight Princess somehow takes place in the same Hyrule. None of it has ever really made any sense, and I'd argue that Tears of the Kingdom is still the closest attempt they've ever made at a direct continuation retaining some sense of a coherent continuity. We get to check in with the characters we've met and see how they're getting on. Yunobo founded a mining company, Sidon is engaged and getting ready to become the new king, Pura is following in the footsteps of the Sheikah, recreating their tech in the wake of its clear absence. Every character you might wonder about has been given a new purpose, except for Teba, for some reason. I think they wanted a smaller character model for the sage that you'd most often see flying around with you, but hey, Tulin has really grown on me, so whatever. But see, that's what I mean. Zelda has always been a gameplay-focused series. The reason the earlier 3D games were able to focus on their stories so much was a result of their linear focus and pacing. That kind of approach naturally lent itself to more involved stories, to bridge the gaps between dungeons. But even still, it was always created to enhance whatever gameplay idea they were running with. That has never meant the storytelling has been bad, and I don't think that's the case with Tears of the Kingdom either. I actually think it has a much stronger command on this style of storytelling than Breath of the Wild did, utilizing smaller details to build out the main conflict. Ganondorf, for example, doesn't get a ton of present-day screen time. We see his exploits in the past, and a bit of him at Hyrule Castle before confronting him in his lair. His actions in the present are much less outspoken, as he schemes his way around the world in the form of Puppet Zelda. He is responsible for releasing the dungeon bosses and corrupting the 4 major areas. He even throws his phantom puppets in different corners of the world in an attempt to subdue you. I had a heart attack the first time one of these grabbed me and the world turned a shade of red. He plays a very active role, even if he's not always there to talk down to you. That's pretty much always been Ganondorf's style. Back in Ocarina and Twilight Princess, he's down to simply manipulate others to get what he wants, and hang around in his lair for the rest of the game, playing on his piano or sitting on his throne waiting for you. I'd actually say this is my favorite variation on his archetype. Here, he has a visible hatred of the Zonai, jealous of their status and wanting it for himself. During your fight with him, he uses a similar combat style to Link, able to wield all of the same weapon types. He has a badass aura around him at all times. That scene where he shows Link and the sages what he plans to do to Hyrule gave me chills. He is the more powerful version of what Calamity Ganon was. All of his power and more, with a manipulative intelligence to back it up. Calamity Ganon was simply the uncondensed form of his burning hatred over thousands of years, seeping out from below Hyrule Castle, and it was able to wreak that much havoc as an uncontrolled force of nature. Oddly, I feel like a lot of people are trying to evaluate Tears of the Kingdom as its own story, when I think it works better as a part 2. Breath of the Wild laid so much of the foundation for this world and its conflict. At the time, the fight against Calamity Ganon wasn't as epic or as satisfying as I was expecting, but now that Tears of the Kingdom has one-upped it so spectacularly, I look at Calamity Ganon with a new perspective. He was simply the stepping stone to something darker, the midpoint to a larger epic. That may not have been their intention when creating Breath of the Wild, but that just means that what they were able to create with Tears of the Kingdom felt so natural to me that I assumed this was their plan all along. The memories of Breath of the Wild were fine and served their purpose in filling in the blanks of what the player already knew happened. That final memory will always tug at my heartstrings, but at the end of the day, all they really do is paint you a clearer picture of something King Rome already told you about. Tears of the Kingdom uses the same format to set up a mystery with a much less clear answer. I was much more interested in seeking these out because although they take place thousands of years ago, it is the present-day Zelda we end up following, meaning that its events are immediately relevant to us. They serve the purpose of teaching us about the first king of Hyrule, his relationship with the first queen of Hyrule, Ganondorf's rise to power, and the imprisoning war, while also revealing to us the fate of Zelda. Zelda has come a long way as a character. Her confidence was once non-existent. She constantly compared her shortcomings to others. She wasn't able to awaken her powers in time, likely blaming herself for the fall of her kingdom. She's able to trap Calamity Ganon for a time, forced to rely on Link to finish the job. By this time, she had clearly gained confidence in her abilities. In the years following the calamity, she dedicated herself to rebuilding her fallen kingdom. She built a school in Hateno Village, built monuments to fallen soldiers across the land, and tasked Purah with recreating the lost Sheikah technology. You get the sense that she's quite comfortable leading her kingdom, in the only way she knows how. It helps that Link clearly has her back no matter what, and it's implied that she started living in his house at Hateno Village. A house with only one bed, I might add. The fact that she even goes with Link to investigate Ganondorf at the beginning of the game shows that even though she lives in service of her people, she obviously has her own interests. She's a scholar at heart, geeking out over the murals depicting the imprisoning war, and no doubt delighting in getting to meet these pivotal figures when she travels to the past. We don't get to see as much of her as I would have liked, but it's enough to build her relationship with these legendary figures of the past. Sonia's death affects her as much as it does everyone else, and from that moment on, she is dedicated to stopping Ganondorf. Of course, she knows they won't be successful, as he's been unleashed in the present, and in that moment, she knows that she has done all she can. Link has to pick up her pieces and finish the job. She receives the broken Master Sword from him, holds it in her hands, and performs a forbidden act in one of the game's most powerful moments. That dragon you saw flying around, that was Zelda. She turned herself into a dragon and hid herself away for thousands of years, pouring her light into the Master Sword to make it strong enough to oppose Ganondorf. This Master Sword pull, resting atop the Light Dragon, is legendary. It is the best Master Sword grab in the franchise, and it isn't even close. Just look at this. You know, I wasn't really sure at the end of Breath of the Wild. I like this version of Link and Zelda, but I wasn't sure how I felt about them in the grand scheme of their various incarnations. Tears of the Kingdom cemented their place for me. This is absolutely my favorite incarnation of these characters. Link is defined in this game especially by his connections to others. He takes the time to help Hyrule rebuild, he solves the problems plaguing the sages, he helps rebuild the destroyed Lurelin village, he's there to settle a major dispute in Hateno village, he's there to become a journalist and investigate Puppet Zelda. The sages lend him their power in return. Zelda lends him hers in the form of a reforged Master Sword. Raru's right hand supplants the one Link lost, giving him new abilities. Through his willingness to forge connections with others, his ability to help Hyrule heal, he rocks up to Ganondorf with a newfound purpose. With the help of the sages, he decimates Ganondorf's army before fighting the man himself. As I mentioned before, his style is a mirror of Link's. He has all of his weapon types, fueled by the power of darkness his secret stone amplifies. He's even able to mimic your Flurry Rush, truly a mirror match for the ages. There's a crucial difference between you and Ganondorf, though. He seeks power above all else. He doesn't care about his kingdom, he only cares about claiming the throne, and he'll do so through his own power. The Gerudo have forsaken him, so all that's left are his twisted creations and his dark power. He is built to destroy, sapping the life out of everything he touches. You were built to create, able to fuse objects together and rebuild. This is not only a battle between darkness and light, it's a battle between destruction and creation. Ganondorf's theme is incredible. It starts with a slower, more foreboding rendition of his classic theme, with a hint of the Japanese shamisen, alluding to his samurai-inspired design. I think this is a shamisen, but to be honest, I have no idea. It certainly sounds like one. This is the duel to end all duels, in the heart of Ganondorf's festering gloom. Eventually, he stops playing around and unleashes his full power. Probably the coolest Ganondorf has ever looked. He sends his puppets to overwhelm you, but just as you had theirs, the sages have your back. Their entrance and the musical leitmotif that accompanies it gave me chills the first time I heard it. Ganondorf's theme builds, with the shamisen growing more prominent. Once his puppets are dealt with, he sends a surge of power, rendering everyone immobile. Except for you. I think in this moment, he truly sees you as his equal and beckons you forward for a true one-on-one duel. His power is bursting out of him, able to permanently destroy your maximum hearts. The power of these blasts was able to destroy the Hylian shield, the most durable shield in the game, in a few hits. He isn't screwing around. Either you hit his projectiles back at him with the Master Sword, or you have to chain flurry rushes together in succession. It's here where his full theme kicks in, a final rendition of the theme of the Blights. This has the gravitas of the duel at the end of Twilight Princess, but actually asks something of you mechanically. Yet, Ganondorf isn't done. In an inversion of Zelda's moment, where she sacrificed her autonomy to help Link, the one she loves most, Ganondorf eats his secret stone out of pure desperation and a lust for more power. His ambition is so great that he would sacrifice his intelligence, his sentience, before surrendering. He cares for nothing else. He grabs Link and flies into the sky, the domain of the gods. He has finally gained enough power to reach the heavens. Link is completely out of his league. He has no chance on his own. But as we've seen consistently throughout his adventures, he has never been alone. Zelda swoops in for the assist, and the final battle begins. Link is poised to fight a dragon on top of another dragon. Some of the sickest imagery in anything I've ever seen. This is it. This is the root of all evil, as we've come to learn. The source of Hyrule's woes. He was responsible for ending Sonia and Rauru. He was responsible for the various calamities. He was responsible for killing the champions, the soldiers of Hyrule, and Zelda's father. He was responsible for ending the world, and he's about to try doing that again. Atop Zelda, Link draws the Master Sword for one final time, and the coolest fight in any Zelda game ensues. This is where the main theme finally kicks in, as you dive onto Ganondorf's weak points and systematically kick the shit out of him, with Zelda there to catch you when you fall. Eventually you get him down to his most desperate state, where he summons the Blood Moon to soak in as much power as he possibly can. I remember moving my camera to meet him while Zelda carried me into the sky, the Blood Moon swelling behind him, coating the world in a red tint, looming larger than it ever had before. I sat there for a few seconds in awe, completely blown away by what I was seeing, until I took one final dive, dodging his blasts, landing on his head, and destroying his secret stone. He proceeded to explode in a column of darkness, eradicating him once and for all, as Link greets the rising sun atop a dragon of light. I have no words for this shot. I made it my phone background. I cannot believe I'm saying this, but they did it. They made the best Zelda ending. It's better than Twilight Princess. I am not joking. I've had months to think about this. All of this within the framework of Breath of the Wild, while not changing a single thing about its storytelling structure, speaking solely through its open-air, non-linear design. I won't argue that this style of story is perfect. Sometimes I wish we got just a little more time with these characters. Part of me wishes we got to see the memories in order this time. Part of me wishes they elaborated on a few more of Breath of the Wild's mysteries. Yunobo is still one of the worst characters they've ever made, but Zelda stories have never been perfect. I have enjoyed all of them in spite of how simple they are, and this one is no different. Turns out, even when Zelda has changed everything about itself, the magic that made us fall in love with it never truly dies. Expectations can be poisonous. They are a rabbit hole of exponentially increasing desire. The longer something takes to create, the more expectations will build, until it spirals into something nobody has any control over. We become so caught up in how something might meet or exceed our expectations that we begin to lose what that creation is, or what it's trying to do. Art is often an exchange between creator and connoisseur. While it is perfectly acceptable for artists not to share their creations with anyone, they often do so anyway. The first time is always quaint. Bewilderment, fascination, adoration. The artist has gained a patron, one who eagerly awaits new creations. As this relationship develops, a pressure begins to build. There's a desire within the artist to keep improving their skills, to make pieces that transcend what they've previously made. As the artist seeks growth, so too does the patron, their obsession with the work growing. Their desire to feel that same sense of wonder again building. The need to outdo the previous work spirals out of control. The artist takes longer to make something, they stress about the smallest details, they begin to wonder how they even made it this far to begin with. What is their artistic voice again? What is their style? Are they making anything truly worthwhile? The connoisseur grows more and more impatient. and with that impatience comes a more hypercritical mindset. They study every little blemish, eager to inform them that this piece is not as spectacular as the last, as their expectations grow into something no one could possibly meet. Maybe the artist isn't even interested in meeting those expectations anymore. Maybe they want to do something different. Maybe they're at odds with what they want to achieve. But the patron doesn't care. They want what they want. They want the piece they dreamed up in their head, and if they don't get it, they're going to be very disappointed. This cycle continues and continues and continues until the artist makes something the patron didn't even know they wanted. I love the classic 3D Zelda games. I love them to death. I love their structure, their stories, their dungeons, pretty much everything about them. I always will. And somewhere deep down inside, I will always yearn for more. Yet, I also love Breath of the Wild. I love Tears of the Kingdom. I want the series to keep moving in that direction, and it seems like it will. Which is weird, because in a lot of ways, Breath of the Wild is like the antithesis of classic 3D Zelda. It may as well be labeling that old format outdated by comparison. Nevertheless, I am able to love them both, since I think it was the natural and necessary next step for healthy growth. With each passing day, I think I've grown with it. These days, I'm perfectly okay with leaving the old behind and fully embracing the new. The more I think about it, the more I'm content with what these 5 games offered me. I don't think I need anything more. And if I ever get that craving, there are talented developers across the industry willing to give me a similar experience wrapped in an entirely new package, not restrained by the confines of what a Zelda can or cannot do. I keep seeing a push for more traditional elements of Zelda to return. People want more traditional dungeons, a more involved story, stuff like that. I used to exist in that same camp, especially when Breath of the Wild first came out. A lot of what that game did felt like spitting in the face of what came before. And if you go back and watch that video, I was a little bitter about how much praise it was getting at the time. Ironically, I've done a complete 180. In a time where more and more people are expressing their disappointment that Breath of the Wild left so much behind, I'm even more glad that it kept barreling forward in a new direction, giving us all something we didn't even know we wanted. I want Zelda to keep doing that. More than simply a formula of game we get every 5 or so years, I want each new Zelda release to completely blow me away. I want Zelda to be a series that consistently makes my jaw hit the floor, trying things I never could have imagined. Ocarina of Time laid the foundation for a beautiful piece. That piece is complete. There is nothing left to add to it. It won't always feel good. The road will be a bit rocky, but growth is inevitable. Breath of the Wild was inevitable. Perhaps we should grow with it.